Good evening. It is Tuesday, October 26th. It is 6 o'clock. We have a full dais tonight, and I am calling this meeting to order. We will be going into executive session and discussing two items. The first item is item 2A. City Council shall convene into closed executive session pursuant to Texas Government Codes Section 551.071 and 551.072 to seek the advice of legal counsel and to deliberate upon the acquisition of real property interests associated with the construction of wastewater treatment plant number 3 at 385 State Highway 304, Unit B, Bastrop, Texas 78602, and its collection systems, including all related agreements, authorizations, easements, resolutions, and associated legal actions. And item 2B, City Council shall convene into closed executive session pursuant to Texas Government Code Sections 551.071 and 551.072 to seek the advice of legal counsel and to deliberate upon the acquisition of real property interests associated with the construction of the unopened section of Agnes Street from Sterling to Terminus, including all related agreements, authorizations, easements, resolutions, and associated legal actions. It is 6:01 and we are in executive session. Okay, it is 6:27 and we are out of executive session. There will be no action taken as a result of executive session. So it is 6:27, executive session is over. There is nothing for item number 3, and we will wait in recess from 6:27 to 6:30 so I can start the meeting at 6:30. Thank you. It is Tuesday, October 26th. It's been a busy day. And I'm calling our regular session to order. We have a full dais and we are called to order. We are really lucky this evening. We have Valentina and Alejandro Irby, and they told me that last year Valentina was in pre-K and Alejandro was in first grade, but this year she is in kindergarten and Alejandro is in second grade, and they go to Emile and they are part of the STARS after school program, and they're gonna come forward and lead all of us in the Pledge of Allegiance. So you guys come on up here. Come on. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, if you will please stand. Okay. Okay, turn around and face the audience and move over so they can see your smiley face. Don't hide behind the podium. There you go. All right, let's give these kids a round of applause. Good job. Thank you so much. If you would please remain standing, we will have our invocation. And I do not see our chaplain, so our police chief will give our invocation tonight. And he is super happy to find out that that just happened.
Of course, thank you for putting me on the spot. May we pray. Today, I pray for all the city leaders. I pray for all the city employees. And I pray for all of us to come together with one heart, of course, always with love. And I also pray that we make great decisions this evening and everything works out great. Amen.
Thank you, Chief Nagy. You may have a seat. All right, so there's going to be a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. I am going to let you guys know that item 9B has been pulled, and it will be brought to our next meeting. So item 9B is pulled for tonight, and it will be at our next meeting. I also want you to know, as I promised some of you that were here a little bit early, there's a pretty good interest in one particular item, and although it is at the end of, on the bottom of page 3, I'm going to pull that forward so that we can have that discussion. Those of you that are here for item 12D, you are certainly welcome to stay with us for the entire meeting, but some of you may not want to spend the entire evening with us, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to go home. But before that, because this, and I promise I have a method to the madness. The first item that we're going to take up is on page 3 at the top of the page. It's citizens' comments. And I have 2 people signed up for citizens' comments. And the first person is Danny Moss. And for all of you, during the public hearing, you'll come to the microphone, you'll say your name and your address, and you will have 3 minutes to address the council, and Mayor Pro Tem Nelson will be keeping the time clock on you. So, Ms. Moss, if you would please come forward. We're on item 10 on page 3.
My name is Danny Moss. I live at 1706 Wilson Street.
Would you pull the mic down? There you go.
So what I would like to address is that we would like pickleball courts in the downtown area, somewhere on one of our city parks, and to be able to utilize the area. So there are a few places around the country that have designated pickleball facilities. So those places generate a lot of income. They have tournaments where 200 and 300 people or more come in from all over the United States in order to have tournaments. And we think it would be a great way for Bastrop to advance our pickleball group. We have 96 members so far. Wow. We play 5 days a week and sometimes 6. On a regular basis, we play Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 7 in the morning until about 11 o'clock in the morning. And then again, we start about 4 o'clock and continue on until no one wants to play anymore, which is very rare. I mean, we have 4 courts going all the time, but we do need designated courts. We need to have at least 6 to 8 because our group continues to grow from people driving by fishermen. They see us out there playing all the time. They come up and they ask what we're doing. It's the largest growing sport in the United States. It started in 1951 and now has gone worldwide. They hold tournaments on TV. Anyone from the age of 8, our oldest member with our group is 83 years old. So we have members from 83 down to the mid-20s that play almost every single day. It's a great activity for seniors especially. It gets us out, gets us out into the park. You make a lot of friends. But there is such a huge variety in order to make the town have money coming in, whether it be people staying at hotels, the Airbnbs, restaurants, especially when you are looking at tournaments for people coming in. So that's what I would like to address, is maybe putting it on the agenda to look at maybe building some pickleball courts for us. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moss. And the other person we have signed up for citizens' comments is Gary Moss. Mr. Moss.
I'm Gary Moss. I live at 1706 and 1708. It's a his and hers. Wilson Street. I wanted to address the pickleball thing first. We just filed for a 501c corp to really get this thing organized and things like to be able to come back to the city council with a plan and stuff. And we're looking for grants and things like that. So we're going to try to raise the money to do this. We got a pretty good money raiser right there with my wife. As you know, she's on Main Street Board. She does pretty good for you guys. So we're going to turn her loose on our thing also. And so that's what I want to speak about on pickleball. And this, as she showed you that. And I am the president of the Pickleball Association. It's like herding cats, so it's very interesting. We need to get together and really have a grand old time. So if you need to come watch us sometime. Terry Moore, it's on the Park and Recreation, is playing with us now too. Got her hooked. So it's if you come, you'll get hooked. You need to come. On down. All right. Do I talk about 12D?
We'll call 12D in a little
That's
bit.
all we wanted.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Moss. And so everyone will know, the reason we're not asking them questions and having conversation about it is because it's not a published item, so we're not allowed to discuss it. But we are allowed to say things like, gee, city manager, you might look for a way for us to take care of this, whether it ought to go to the Parks Board first, and that's probably a good methodology, but we can certainly put it for future discussion, but we can't discuss it tonight because it's not on the agenda. Okay, so we're done with citizen comments, and now, as promised, we're moving on to item number 12D. Hold a public hearing and consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2021-15 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, rezoning 15.824 acres out of Farm Lot 37 East Main Street located at 1500 Farm Street within the city limits of Bastrop, Texas from P3 neighborhood to P4 mix as shown in Exhibit A, including a severability clause and establish an effective date and move to include on the November 9th, 2021 City Council agenda for a second reading. So I'm gonna, before we get started, there's a couple of things I wanna go over. Staff is gonna make a presentation. Us, council's gonna ask staff if they have any questions. The applicant is gonna have an opportunity to speak if there's anything that they wanna fill in the blanks for staff, and council will have an opportunity to ask the applicant questions. Then we'll be done with that part of it, and I will open the public hearing. I am doing my absolute best to call people in the order that we receive the cards. And if we mess that up, it's purely an accident. We're trying really hard to call them in the order that people have signed up. Just a gentle reminder, we're doing city business. So we aren't gonna cheer, we aren't gonna boo, we're gonna act in a professional manner, we're gonna be kind to our neighbors because that's how we are in the Bastrop community. So with that, I will turn things over to Assistant City Manager Job for staff presentation. Mr. Job.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor and Council. So here we have is a location map of the site. I think everybody's pretty familiar with it, but it is a piece of property that is actually between Cedar and Farm. Here is a current location map as well that just shows the current zoning. This is P5 along 95 here, and we're talking about zoning this tract to be clear from what's currently P3 to a P4 mix. The overall size is about 15.824 acres. It's a portion of 2 farm lots, and the developer is actually proposing traditional neighborhood development, which means maintaining that 330 by 330 gridded block structure. The extension of Chamber Streets between Farm and Cedar is the only public street that's proposed in this development. It will include some on-street parking. There are 3 additional drive aisles from Chambers to Farm, or actually not to Farm yet, but to Chambers, creating those 4 building blocks that we discussed earlier. So there will be some additional lots that you'll see, some clubhouse, some amenities, some publicly dedicated open space, and some parallel drive aisles that serve for circulation of the site. The building type is apartment, which is allowed in the P4. That is for units greater than 5. The building orientation will be towards Chambers, so that means the public street they will face will be Chambers Street. And the parking and open space dedication between the buildings and Gills Branch will be seen as well. And this is what they're proposing. Again, to talk about the intent of the B3 codes, this block structure is what we were talking about, how that 330 created block is what we're meeting. There's actually meeting the same intent of the way the buildings are facing. It truly does follow, again, the intent of the overall B3 codes. While the streets aren't dedicated as public, they are meeting the correct building form. This is just another picture to give you some color. And the conceptual drainage plan has been approved. We do know that there's going to be Gills Branch improvements in this area at some time, and that has actually been taken into account with the spacing, and we have met that 100-foot buffer from the center of the creek line as part of their design. They are working on some flood mitigation. They are meeting those requirements. And then further detail reviewed and approved during subdivision and platting. What that means is we will look at the actual construction of the site as we move into public improvement plans and site development. Again, those architectural styles match the authentic pattern book. The streetscape and the diversity of the buildings can't be exactly the same, so that's what they're providing there. This will have some corner treatments, so and what we're talking about there is when you're looking at this picture where there are not buildings facing the roads, you will actually see some, and if I could work this clicker, it'd be a lot better. You will actually see some treatments that cover the parking, right, and the sides of the buildings to give a good street view from all the angles. And the residential home styles that you see to the, help me out here, west, absolutely. This actually forms as quite a good buffer where you saw that P5 and that commercial core along Highway 95. That's why we think apartments is a good idea here. It's transitional housing as you move into a denser commercial corridor to this traditional housing in between. Here are some renderings of what this may look like. Again, these will be discussed, and we'll make sure that they meet all of the certificates of appropriateness for the historic downtown requirements. Later on in the process, we should be planning for a tax credit consideration. We'll move into subdivision platting, drainage and public improvements, site development plans, certificates of appropriateness, and then finally, building permits. I double checked with staff today. We actually received 7 opposed, no objections, 2 in favor for a total of 9. No additional feedback since the planning and zoning meeting. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Council, any questions for Mr. Job? Councilmember Jackson?
Yes, Mr.
No, excuse me, this is council discussion. Councilmember Jackson?
Right. On the number of objections and those in favor, how many notices were sent out?
There were 23 properties that were notified.
Okay.
7 objected.
And we just got 9 responses back.
Correct.
As of the planning and zoning meeting,
As
we've
of the
got,
planning and zoning,
we've gotten stuff yesterday and
Right, 'cause I
today,
was gonna
but
say,
he's just reporting what they did by planning and zoning.
Right. I just wanted to make sure because I've gotten more than that for sure. Okay.
sure. Out of the notices that were sent out, 9 replied.
And so that everyone knows, the notices that are sent out is legislated from a statutory standpoint of who you are to notify.
Correct. It's a 200-foot requirement
Okay.
surrounding the property.
Council, any other questions for Mr. Job? Councilmember Rogers?
So looking at this, in their parking area, so all of these cars are gonna go either off onto Cedar Farm or Chambers, right?
Correct.
So nothing goes off onto 95 because they've got another land in between.
Well, and that in because of Gills Branch, right? So our code
Right.
allows for some geographic sensitivity, and then crossing the creek, we know there's improvements that are coming that direction. So that wasn't proposed, but this is actually a pedestrian access point that they're provided. So if something does happen along Gills Branch as far as the ability to walk beside it, there's some improvements, that's how you'll access it. They do have pedestrian access across the
And
site.
again, how many apartments are they putting?
It's 120 units.
120 units, so that's 120 cars approximately.
Could be.
I mean, at minimum, or whatever.
Right, there's 165 parking spaces.
Is that counting what's on the street?
That is counting what's on the street. And then there's an additional 17 bicycle spaces, if that helps.
Thank you.
Sure.
Councilmember Crouch?
Has there been a traffic study done? And
So-
if there was one done, did it incorporate how big of an area to show what the impact in cars is going to be?
Sure, so a traffic impact analysis is not required at this level for zoning. That type of stuff happens, which I would expect. If you don't follow the grid, council could actually absolutely give some direction here tonight to make sure we do a traffic impact analysis as part of the overall public improvement plans and the site development plan. And that's usually when that's reviewed. So at that time, they'll see if there has to be street improvements, if there has to be additional turning lanes added. Any type of improvement, we'll look at certainly several intersections outside of just that site.
And you mentioned it was in a flood zone, so what has been done as far as the design of the buildings to mitigate the flood hazard there?
So currently, there is a 30% level view of a conceptual drainage plan. It has taken into account the 10, the 25-year and the 100-year storm. And because this discharges into Gills Branch, they're actually required to discharge at a 25-year storm level. So it's a greater requirement here than anywhere else in the city. They're actually shaving, it's going to be in better shape than it is today. They're shaving the peak.
Mr. Job, when we approved the drainage manual, it's my recollection that Gills Branch has the strictest drainage regulations of anywhere in the town.
That's correct. They are required to detain all the way to the 25. Everyone else is to the 100. To discharge at the 25. Let me clarify that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And why the change from P3 to P4?
Apartments is not an approved building form in P3, so it has to be P4, just like it would have been previously with the other zoning, would have been single-family residential. They would have made a request to be multifamily. The same process.
And then another question is why P4 after we just zoned it P3 in our last zoning, when it created the zoning? I
Sure.
mean, it hasn't been that long since we just created the zoning. Why change it now?
Because it's a request of the applicant. They want to build a product and that product requires it to be P4.
Is it considered affordable housing or low-income housing? Is there?
There's no, I don't believe that it is slated, any percentage of it is for affordable or workforce or, right, workforce housing. There will be the tax credits that are
Councilmember Crouch,
proposed
would you
later
like the
on.
applicant to address that question?
Yes, that'd be awesome.
Would the applicant come forward and address that question?
Way down. Hi, I'm Sarah Andre, I'm the applicant. With regard to your question, with the zoning request, there's not a particular type of housing, for example, that it's tied to. Our intention is to do workforce housing, so yes, it would be affordable housing.
Trey, maybe you might have to use your clicker. Can you zoom in on the parking? So the street that's going to cut from north to south, right, would be is it Chambers? Chalmers?
Here? The public street,
No.
yes, that's Chambers.
Yes.
That will be Chambers.
Okay. And so that's going to be, it's dead ends right now at the Arts.
Right, sure, it's nice to be taller than somebody. So finally, thank you. Actually, the driveway, the entrance into the back center is built in the public right-of-way. So they
And
will
then
continue that through.
Is it planned to have parking both sides of that street?
Our cross-section requires parking on both sides. What you're seeing here is their proportional share of the road, which is half of the street. That's why you see one lane and only one parking on one side.
So, and we'd be responsible for the other half?
Unless there was development on the other side of that the developer would be responsible.
And then you mentioned parks at Gills Branch, or,
Right, there's some dedicated, essentially, civic space and possible for pedestrian access at some point. There's a 100-foot stream buffer required off of Gills Branch. That's kind of your civic space. If there are improvements there at one point, there could be walking trails, there could be anything. At the moment, there's no plans for that, but that basically is a civic space requirement that's being met.
with 110 units, what do you predict the quantity of people are going to be in that complex? That's for the, I guess, I don't think Trey would, maybe Trey does know that.
It will be a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. So, you know, 1 bedroom unit's gonna have 1 person, a 3 bedroom unit could have 4 people. So there's a mix in there. I would have to do some math to give you something I thought was accurate. And I could do some math in the back of the room while he's speaking, but
Yeah,
For
Not off the top
clarity,
of my
it's
head.
120 units, not
Yes.
110.
okay, so it is 120 units. So, and Trey, another question kind of along that line is, so if it was left in P3 zoning as P3, you would have on an average, maybe a third of an acre lot, and maybe with that same quantity of land, you would have just 50 houses by
So-
doing some simple math, right, or close to that approximately.
Currently, we don't have a minimum lot size, so the lot size could be any size. We do have a story limit, which is 3. We do have a requirements on how you interact with the public realm, but there could be several 2-story homes, even duplexes in P3 that could duplicate the exact same traffic. Again, that traffic impact and cars are taken care of at the public improvement plan level, construction plans.
It's safe to say that if it remained P3, that we wouldn't have the amount of people or vehicles in it as we would with P4.
I don't think we can make that assumption without knowing what the next proposed development would be.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay. Councilmember Rogers?
My understanding, so this is just the first step of many steps. It'll come back, you know, this is just the plan, then several steps will come back in front of the council, is that correct?
You will see the zoning, you will see the, again, hopefully the next meeting. This will come back to P&Z for the plat. The next process, the majority of this process is
That's fine.
administrative. Yeah, you will see it
So
again.
my question being is, let's say it approves and it turns into a P4, and then somehow the applicant, it doesn't come to fruition, is that the right word, fruition? That would stay P4, is that correct?
Correct.
So then we would have to address it again with whoever buys the property from them, or
That's correct.
whichever.
That's correct.
Councilmember Rogers, one thing to keep in mind, if there's concerns in that, we can do overlays. You might recall the property that the LCRA owned and the neighbors were concerned about the height restrictions, so we did an overlay that said that it could not be more than 2.5 stories. So that zoning, you're exactly right, zoning stays with the land, independent of who owns the land. But as council, we can put additional restrictions. So for example, we could say it was an overlay that is only allowed to have a maximum of X number of apartments. And that would be a way, whether it's this applicant or if the property was sold, we could put restrictions on the zoning. Correct, Mr. Attorney, Mr. Borquez?
That is correct, Mayor. We can do that.
So in a P3, can they have a 3-story in a P3? Like a 3-story house?
I would have to pull that up and take a look at it, but what we do is limit the stories. In P3, I think it can be downtown. Again, I can get you that answer. I'm not 100% sure. Let's just wait on
You can
that.
get me the answer tonight.
Sure, I can look it up. What I
can
can
help.
tell you,
It's on page 109 of our building Bastrop, and
Okay.
it is 2 stories in
There you
P3 and
go.
3 stories in P4.
Okay.
perfect.
And it has to be a 3-story place? Never mind.
No,
Okay.
no, it's just, again, we don't regulate the use, we regulate the form. And what P4 does require is that you keep a form that's, house-based,
Okay.
essentially, residentially based.
All right, thank you.
So,
And Councilmember Rogers, I know you're also aware that if it's P3, they could also come and ask for a variance to go to 3 stories, as the apartments did in the Hunters Crossing area. They got a variance for 3 stories.
I'm not sure if it matters, but these would absolutely all be shorter than the patch, if that matters.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
So that I understand, under P3, there could be duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes,
Correct.
which takes basically the same form as multifamily.
It does. It's the same use, if you will, but the form looks more like a single-family home.
Certainly. And I have a question for the applicant. Hate to make you come back up again, but I think you're probably more qualified to answer this question. Could you provide us with the definition of affordable or
Sure,
workforce housing, please?
I absolutely could. Basically, the housing would be restricted to households earning 60% or less of the area's median income. So for our site, which has, and that is scaled by unit size, right? So a family that has 5 people in it and a 4-bedroom unit, that's going to have a higher income than a 1-bedroom and a 1-person unit. So for this development, it ranges from $41,580,000 to $59,340 at this time. And we did look, just in case people are curious, at some of the current job postings for the city of Bastrop, or in the city, not necessarily with the city. And we found a few examples: a code compliance officer and a Bastrop Independent School District teacher's assistant would both qualify in that income range.
So to carry this a little bit further, this is not housing vouchers. This is simply, these are market rate apartments.
Depends on how you define market rate, but they are not voucher apartments.
Thank you.
So,
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. I've just got some concerns about the cost. I look at traffic, number one, along with the school, and I see, by looking at the railroad tracks over there, they narrow down, which I see a bottleneck going there. I see a one-way at the elementary school, and those are just some things that I'm looking at. And I look at flood mitigation. Who's going to pay for the flood mitigation and removing different sewer lines and so forth that goes actually across Gills Branch? Because there's like a 10-inch sewer line that goes like a foot off the ground that's in Gills Branch. And I see some delays there of trash building there and backing Gills Branch up.
So this particular site doesn't address off-site wastewater improvements or things of that nature. What their requirement is to discharge at the 25-year storm rate and actually have less of an impact on Gills Branch than it already has from the existing condition.
But what I'm asking is the runoff from these apartments going into Gills Branch, and it's north of Farm Street, which
Right.
I can see some trash building up underneath the bridge at Farm Street, which creates a whole nother ballgame for us.
Right, so your concern is that there'll be trash from the site
Yes.
that collects in the?
Yes.
Well, that's really something that we would clean up after a rain. Right, the city does. We currently do that now.
Okay.
If it's in the ditch, right?
Let's still look at, back to the railroad tracks again. It narrows way down, a lot narrower than the street. Now, that's going to make another bottleneck for traffic that's trying to get to and from the school. So that's another issue we need to look at, and that's railroad property, and the city doesn't have any control over that.
Right, no, I agree, and that's what I was speaking to earlier, is at the transportation impact analysis is a requirement we can impose later on down the road. It doesn't happen at this level, because there's not that much detail. But there can be improvements that are required on existing intersections. So there could be a requirement to make some improvements on Cedar, for example, or Farm, or in some cases, rare, it's a signal. But what they're responsible for is their percentage of that impact.
Okay. How about Chandler Street? Who's gonna, that's gonna be part of their project to extend that street? I think there's a dead end there.
To extend Chambers, are we talking about?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Chambers would run from Farm to Cedar. I actually think it would help relieve some traffic that stacks on Cedar by moving it to
Mr.
Farm.
Job, I believe Councilmember Peterson's wanting to confirm who's going to pay
Yes.
for.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the developer's required to pay for the improvement.
Okay.
Councilmember Rogers?
I didn't realize it until I blew this diagram up, that Chambers is gonna be a one-way street? Is that the way it, for the city? If, you know, because I know that was plotted that, or is that their design to make it a one-way street?
Right. What they're showing is their proportional share here, and that's half of the road with parking, right? What we would essentially do is make sure there was passable lanes, right? And it could be, it does not necessarily have to be one way. It could be Yield Street. There's several other options. Does that help at all?
Nope.
No? So we determine the width of the pavement at the time of design. This is just a conceptual drawing. We will make sure there is a passable street as part of this plan.
Councilmember Rogers, I believe Mr. Job's also trying to say that when you own a piece of property, you're responsible for half of the road. So then when the other piece of property develops, they would be responsible. They couldn't get platted until they dedicated the right-of-way for the other half of the road.
So they're only building half the road?
Their requirement is their fiscal responsibility is for half the road.
So there really won't be a road, there'll only be a half a road.
Well, that's the kind of stuff you talk about at design.
Well, I think we should talk about it now before we talk about design.
And what Mr. Job is also saying is that we would make sure it's passable.
Correct, yeah. So unless there was an restriction opposed later, the council decided if you wanted this to be a one-way road, we would make sure there is a road that's passable. I guess one of your concerns may be is it that parking wouldn't be available if that was all that was shown here? Right?
I guess my concern is you're talking about how they're going to build the road, but it really won't be a public access road because there'll only be one lane, according to this, which that really isn't a public road, really.
So for example,
I'm not understanding.
half a road was built a good example of this is Bear Hunter. They're in Hunter's Crossing. They were responsible for that half of that street. That's what's built there today.
Right, but Bear Hunter is not in between two busy roads.
My point is they designed a passable road that has 2 lanes of traffic. You can change it by changing the striping. Pavement width is done at the design
So the
stage.
pavement width is the same as a full
The
2-lane road?
The pavement, it will be passable.
Okay, that didn't answer my question. My question was the pavement that you're talking about when they're
Not if
going to
it's only
change the
half the
striping.
road. So what you're required to do is have passable driving lanes, which are 2 10-foot lanes, right? And then our cross-section also shows additional parking. It may be, at this point, there's not on-street parking to make sure there's passable lanes.
So the rest of the road will not be developed until the other side of the road gets sold, developed, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Crouch?
Have you guys built this project somewhere else comparable?
I think that's for the applicant.
Yes. Sorry.
We haven't built this exact project. This is a unique site with a unique form. We have built many thousands of apartment units throughout Texas. I've personally worked on about 13,000, is that my number? Around in there at this point. So all over the state, there are developments in small towns, big towns, Austin, Houston, Katy, Cisco, Plainview, Brownsville, a number of places.
But not this format?
Not this building, actually. Well, no, all those units I've talked about, they're all affordable units. I've helped finance, I think, is it $1 billion? $1 billion, I think, worth of these developments at this point, so a lot of projects. This building is actually, a lot of times what people do is they have their building that they do. We've got our 8-unit building and our 12-unit building, and we just find a piece of land and we plop, 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 plop. That's not what this is. You can't do that here. Number one, you're in a historic district. Number two, this site has all kinds of unique features. Your code is unique with the blocks. And so we actually spent a lot of time developing a unique building. So the building forms that you saw tonight are unique to this site. I've never built those exact buildings.
That's why I asked the question. So
Okay.
I just wanted to see if you're cutting and pasting a site from another city and putting it in our town and just building the same thing over and over again. So it's more of a custom for a Bastrop thing than it is
Yes,
for
sir.
cutting and pasting and sticking it on a site plan and putting it in Bastrop.
My name is Sally Burchett, and I work with Sarah, and we went through 2 or 3 architects to find someone who was listening and understood that this is different. This is not a regular standard apartment complex you see on the highway, and to get the design that is context sensitive with this downtown area, both the site plan and the architectural details. And so it isn't anything we've built before. It's designed specifically for downtown Bastrop.
And one of the other things, I'm just going to point this out on the site plan because you may be saying, well, what's all this green area? A lot of that is because of the unique drainage requirements. We can't just fill the whole site up with buildings and meet the requirements, right? A lot of people would just try to max it out as many buildings as possible. This has a lot of green space in order to enhance that drainage.
One more question.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't you just design it for our P3 code? Why did you want us to change the P4 code? Why don't you just design it for what it's intended for right now?
We did that last year, or in 2020, in the before times, I think we're calling them. And we wanted to do 3-story buildings because we wanted to make it compact enough where we could have enough green space where we weren't digging a gigantic, the whole thing wasn't just gigantic detention swimming ponds with a chain link fence around them. I thought that would be very ugly and not to my personal standard of where I would want to live or have anybody else live. So trying to solidify the buildings, if you go up 1 story and use a 3-story building, then you get more units in one building. You have more green for the water to percolate through. That's my basic understanding of it.
Yeah.
She's the planner. I'm more on the finance side.
Yeah, there's a reason we have our zoning and our codes the way we have it now, and it wasn't for what you just said, for your vision of it. That P3, B3 code and our zoning went through, we just adopted it in the past, within 5 years. And so there's a reason that it's zone P3 now, and it's zoned that way because it is a historic district, like you said, and it is more geared for residential development and not multifamily. And so that's why we zoned it that way to start off with. So for me, I don't see the change for P3, P4, just because of that, because we've spent a lot of time and effort and money on our current code and our current zoning, and if you've already presented it once, then.
Well, let me, address that. When we got here, first looking at the zoning, staff was surprised that it was P3 because its location. It was, they in their minds thought this was a P4 site, and the reason why is it was a place to place. So it was based on the existing land use that was there before and the existing zoning category. And that's why our feedback was this was a reasonable request. It was consistent with the comprehensive plan. It just, because of what it was zoned before, it automatically de facto went to P3.
And, Trey can answer this way better than I can, but under P3, it's not that it would be a reduction in the number of dwelling units. You could come in under the current code and do the same number of dwelling units. And it's my understanding that if you subdivided it into single-family lots, which I know a lot of people would like, you'd have little to no drainage mitigation for the flooding required, because each of those little lots would be their own thing. But as I said, your staff can answer that better than me.
I think I can speak to that a little bit. The P4 requirement allows you, or the P4 allows you to have a 70% lot coverage. And I think their impervious cover is about 22% proposed on this site. And what you're speaking to is there's a 60% for P3, and that's something that's less regulated, but it's certainly not as scrutinized when it's single family coming in at one at a time. If that makes sense. There are changes that happen in single family dwellings all of the time that are a little tougher to regulate. A lot of people put sheds and things of that nature.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
So if I read it correctly, we're talking about 22% impervious cover with 3-story units.
Correct.
Have we been able to ascertain what the impervious cover percentage would be with 2-story apartments?
We could take the acreage and figure 60% as the allowable max. Again, without any plans, it's hard to tell, but you're allowed to cover 60% in P3, I believe.
But to Councilmember Crouch's question and comment relative to remaining P3 with duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes, you could have the same number of units with more or less impervious cover, correct?
You could, yes. You could actually have more impervious cover.
Therefore creating drainage,
Correct.
more extensive drainage issues, to Councilmember Peterson's point. Okay, thank you.
So again, what you mentioned, the reason staff thought this was a good transition because of the commercial. This is a great space for transitional housing for P4. It does really follow the intent of the code, which I think Councilmember Crouch was speaking to. You would have this gridded block structure requirement regardless. They've followed that. The only thing that is not exact in this design is that what you see in black won't be public. It'll be private with pedestrian access. So still accessible to the public, just not vehicular.
So they would be maintained by the developer?
Correct.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Trey, I guess we'll beat this in the desk, but you mentioned the developer has to make one side driveways down the street, and the city would come in and make the other side to where everything's passable.
So what I was referring to is what's shown here is conceptual, right?
Okay.
And what they're required to do is half of that 55.5-foot right-of-way. That is a requirement. At the design level, if we would like this to be two-way and no parking, that's where that happens. It doesn't happen at this conceptual level. But they are fiscally required to pay for half of that road.
Okay, that was my question, because we're going to have some on-street parking. I think it's going to narrow that street down to where it's going to be tough to get through there.
Sure. Understand completely.
Okay.
This may be a question for the applicant. I see cross-sections where some of them are 2-story and some of them are 3-story. Could you show on the layout which ones are, and I know it's conceptual, but which ones are no, I don't want to see the cross-section. I want to see on that picture.
Perfect.
Can you let us know which buildings are 3-story in the plan currently?
These are all 2-story, the ones that front chambers, and the 3-story are in the back. So we stepped it back to be more sensitive to the existing urban pattern.
I appreciate you answering the question, and you're using the TV, but if people are watching at home, they didn't hear what you said. So if you could come to the mic, I would appreciate it.
The buildings that front chambers are 2-story, and these that are farther back are the 3-story structures. And that was done intentionally to transition the form from the single-family urban fabric further back to the more dense area that's the Creek 95 and the P5 zoning on the other next door.
Thank you. Councilmember Rogers?
I know I'm beating this to death, Bill Peterson. On the road with Chambers, you said it goes out at the PAC Center? So where people right now think that's the entrance to the PAC, it's actually a road?
It is, it's, the driveway is built in the right-of-way, yes.
Have you ever been to the PAC?
Say that one more time?
Have you ever been to the PAC?
I have.
That's already a cluster with all those kids. And now you're gonna put the road
Sure.
with the 16-year-old drivers? Okay, just curious what your plan was. Thank you.
Trey, can you zoom in on that?
Councilmember Crouch, I need you to hit your mic, and I'll give you the floor. Councilmember Crouch?
Can you zoom in on that parking on the bottom road? So that's the one that Councilmember Rogers was talking about, that would just be one lane, correct? One lane developed by them, one lane developed by the adjacent property owner or the city, or is it the one north of that?
So what the requirement for the developer is they are fiscally responsible for half of the right-of-way, which is 55 and a half feet. That's 27 and a half feet, give or take. At design, that's where we talk about if there's on-street parking or not, which means it could be.
How many travel lanes there are.
And how many travel lanes there are. Yes. I would love to give you the answer, but I don't have the design yet. But what you see here is, what's most important is there's a connection, and you're right, they are proposing parking in this concept.
Okay, so that would be the proposal. Maybe that's a question for the developer then. Are y'all planning on putting parking on the street for all those units along that street? Or they have separate parking in front of their house?
The 165 spaces include the on-street parking.
I believe there's 125 spots throughout the development, and there's 40 along Chambers, making it to 165. We've designed this how, we thought the city wanted it with less parking rather than more for impervious cover reasons, and also with the walkability aspects of the way the project's designed.
So you said 160 parking spaces for 120 units?
165 parking spaces as shown on this concept plan. 40 of those are on the street. 125 are up in the blacktop area, what you're looking at that looks like blacktop. We designed the on-street parking because we thought that was compatible with Bastrop's plan. If the city wants to direct us to increase the parking on our side of the land, they can do that, I think, right? Yeah.
We have room.
This is an artist's rendering. This is not a specific.
Yeah, we're just trying to get a visual of what you're trying to present and what the parking issues could be. So
Of
with
course.
120 units, I would almost say that you'd need double that as far as parking spaces, because everybody's got 2 cars in their household, or the majority of people do. Some people have 3 or 4, and so if you have an apartment complex or multifamily units, and you have more than one person driving a car, or 2 or 3 or 4, if you have 3-bedroom units, you could have at least that many driving, then I would say that the parking isn't adequate for what you're presenting.
We absolutely want to provide adequate parking. You can't lease up units that don't have a place to park. So we absolutely want that. This was literally our response to what we thought we read in the plan.
Yeah, I think it was short on parking.
Councilmember Crouch, it's important to note that there's not parking requirements in the zoning code.
Right.
No, I'm just thinking of the reality of the
Understand.
situation that's going to be presented. So if all these are built.
Mr. Hoffman?
They were,
I think Trey's about to address it, but
yeah, they were absolutely following the policy direction that's in the code where there is no parking requirement. a maximum parking requirement. So essentially, the only requirement that you do have is what the building code requires.
Well, and to address it from not just a negative, we don't have parking requirements standpoint, but from a positive policy standpoint, what the B3 codes at the heart of them are really trying to accomplish here from a pedestrian-friendly, walkability, not driven by automobile use kind of land use, which is, again, kind of an important cornerstone of what the B3 codes are all about.
Right.
And so, yeah, when the staff is meeting with an applicant before we get to this level, and to the extent they're looking for guidance from the staff, that's precisely the kind of input they're going to get. Yeah.
And again, it's my understanding there is, and we could look at the state requirements, not everyone in affordable housing will have 3 or 4 cars. Generally, the whole point of diversifying the housing is so people can walk or ride their bike. They could work at the school, they could live there, they could walk to work. That is, again, the whole intent of the code.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
But as we're in the conceptual stage at this point in time, those considerations have to be discussed and negotiated in some way, shape, or form to ascertain what might be the best plan going forward. But again, we're still in the conceptual stage. There's nothing concrete in this drawing. It's a concept.
That's absolutely correct. This is a concept scheme.
Councilmember Crouch?
In the P3 code, is there any parking requirements on the neighborhood code?
No, sir.
There's nothing that you can put as many cars in front of your house as you can actually park on the street then, right?
You can, we tell you where to park in the lot, we don't tell you how many cars you can park.
And then this would be exactly the same way, so.
Exactly the same. So you're required to park in that second and third layer of the lot, which is what you see here, because the lot fronts Chambers, this is the third layer. That's why you see the parking back there.
Can you see the Performing Arts Center in this?
Just the driveway.
Excuse me?
Just the driveway. Right here.
Okay, so you can't see the parking lot for it.
Mr. Job, you might go to the overview that shows the land use. Let me tell you what page it's on. The very, in our packet, it's page 86.
I don't know that this is the same.
Oh, that'll work. Go back one.
The zoning.
There you go.
Or maybe the next one.
Well, so the blue that is at Cedar Street is the PAC.
Correct.
That's the civic space.
So I guess my concern is if there's not adequate parking, would the people that live in those units park in the Performing Arts Center parking lot? I mean, that would be the next closest parking lot, right, available for it?
So there are parking restrictions on Cedar Street. I suppose there could be spillover there. It's his public property, owned by the school.
Okay.
And it's also important to note that, Councilmember Rogers, to your point that it feels like a driveway, Chambers has been shown on city plats since the beginning of time as a street. It's just not completely built. Councilmember Jackson?
I've been listening in, and I think some very good points have been made by council tonight. A lot of the people that have contacted me, in fact, I didn't receive any comments or contact from any citizen that were approving of this plan and this concept for the reasons that have been mentioned tonight, such as the drainage, the traffic concerns, the overcrowding in the neighborhoods and things like that. So I've heard nothing but no from everyone that's contacted me, and I've listened to quite a few people, and they have really been very adamant about the changing of their neighborhood and the concept and everything. So I just wanted, that's why I've been listening, just to kind of get a better idea. But I mean, maybe when we hear from the citizens later on, we'll hear some other opinions, but everyone that's contacted me, I mean, 100% of them have said no to the project, and I just, that's why I'm being so quiet and listening in, trying to see if there's some other sides to it. But based upon what I've heard and based upon the situation that we've discussed, I'm going to find it hard to support the project.
Thank you, Councilmember Jackson. Did you have a question for the applicant or for staff? No?
I have one more if you don't mind.
Councilmember Rogers?
Did we contact BISD?
BISD is actually one of the people that were notified, and they're in favor. And they are aware of they do know that Chambers Street is a street.
Oh, I know, I just was wondering if they were contacted and what their answer was.
They were,
All right,
and they're in
thank you.
favor, actually.
All right, thank you.
I do have one other comment, though, or one other question.
Councilmember Jackson?
We're talking about the packed parking lot, and we're saying that maybe some of the neighborhood would park into the pack parking lot. It could be the same in reverse, since the pack, I know, a lot of times is very full, so we may have a spillover from the pack into the neighborhood also with the additional parking and other spaces that are there. So I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that it's a two-sided sword there.
Thank you, Councilmember Jackson. Council, any more? Are we ready to have our public hearing? Any other thing that Assistant City Manager Jobe or City Manager Hoffman wants us to discuss? All right, it is 7:28, and I am opening the public hearing. Council, we have a number of folks that have submitted their comments and do not wish to speak. I believe you may have a copy of those, you may not have a copy of those, but we're going to start with the folks that are in the building, and then I'll take care of the ones that submitted their comments. The first person, and what I would like each of you to do when your name's called, if you would please come forward and say your name and your address, and then you'll be given 3 minutes to speak. Feel free to move the mic around. The folks at home, if you don't talk into the mic, they'll start texting, "We can't hear. Why won't they let us hear?" And they get mad. And they don't get mad at you, they get mad at us. So if you would please make sure that you're speaking in the mic, I would very much appreciate that. The first person signed up to speak is Mary Ellen Arbuckle.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, council members. Thank you for opening this up. I've been here before. I moved here from the Houston Heights, where I watched my neighborhood full of historic homes become a neighborhood filled with nothing but townhouses, with one exception, and that was my block, because I had gotten minimum building line and minimum lot size protection on them. That was being taken away at the last minute by a variance that was given. So, developers are for-profit businesses. Nothing wrong with that, but we just need to be aware of that. Established areas in prime locations are not profitable as is. There is nowhere for them to build, and property values are too high for profitable investment. How do developers change the areas? How do developers take over historic areas for their own profits? One variance at a time, and usually from the outside in. So they can say, well, this is right next to a P4, so let's just change it to P4. So then the next one's going to be right next to a P4, and they slowly go in and take over the entire neighborhood. Downtown historic Bastrop would be gone in a matter of years. I watched it happen in Houston Heights, and I moved here to get away from that, and hoping that we had a more protection here from that kind of development. One apartment complex leads to deeper encroachment and destruction of a historic area. Stop it in its tracks. This affects all Bastrop, as the historic structures add charm that bring interest to the area. They profit from our established properties while destroying them. Let's define highest and best use, a term often used by developers. In short, highest and best use is profit. The long form is highest and best use is physically possible, legally permissible, financially feasible, and most profitable. In an established area, density is the quickest way to achieve profits. Quality of construction is significantly lower than existing structures, and the quickest way to adversely affect the existing community. There are many, many properties that lend themselves better to a large apartment complex. These properties are not in the historic Bastrop district. And what of the property owners whose properties will border on this, who in good faith significantly improved their properties in recent years at their own personal cost? Established city codes was it 2-3 years ago, we went through a rigorous and arduous process of establishing codes for Bastrop at a very high cost of taxpayer dollars. Why are we so quick to even consider a variance for the worst kind of property when we just agreed on the validity of these codes so recently? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Arbuckle. Susan Long? Good evening. If you'll please state your name and address.
Susan Long, 1402 Hill Street. And I grew up in Bastrop and only left long enough to graduate from UT. Oh, and yeah, go to work for a property management company that handled apartment complexes, and then later on for a builder developer who also had lots of apartment complexes. So I got to see what happened to neighborhoods when you put in a very large apartment complex in an established area. Right now, we are being hit with a tsunami, a tidal wave of people leaving Austin. Why are they leaving? Because the quality of life has disappeared in their neighborhoods. Bastrop has that quality of life. As citizens, we are charged with being caregivers and have the responsibility to preserve that quality of life. Projects of this density being built in a historic neighborhood will destroy the quality of life and thus the neighborhood. I had the privilege of visiting with the families that live in the immediate area there on Farm Street. Many have lived there multi-generational. They're descendants of the people that built these historic homes. It's a historic area. We declared it historic. We made the decision to protect this area. It's not about just protecting the buildings or just protecting the site. It's about protecting the quality of life. This project could be a great project in the proper area. This is not the proper area. There's so much I want to say. There's not enough time to do it, but I am going to tell you this. I walked the entire property that's we're being proposed for this building and extensive projects that they're going to build. The Greenbelt area right now serves as a major resource in the ability to absorb heavy-duty rainfall, thus preventing extraordinary flooding. It absorbs the water, which travels to our amazing aquifers. What a resource we have in this community. It absorbs the water and into these aquifers and throughout Bastrop. Now, here's the other wonderful feature of this area, Gill's Branch. Okay, that is a major flood control avenue.
Thank you, Ms.
I'm sorry,
Long.
my time is up. Keep these in mind, okay?
Thank you, Ms. Long. Johnny Sanders? Mr. Sanders, if you'd state your name and address?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor and council and city manager. My name is Johnny Sanders. I live at 156 Spring Branch. You could throw a rock from your wastewater plant and hit my backyard.
We wouldn't throw rocks at you.
And
Mr. Sanders, most people associate you with Bluebonnet. Are you speaking on
no,
behalf
I
of
am
Bluebonnet?
not speaking of Blue. I'm speaking of
Okay.
Johnny Sanders, a lifelong resident of Bastrop.
Thank you.
I sure am. What I want to address tonight is what you're dealing with. I respect each and every one of you and what you're dealt with. I know you make a lot of money being on the city council. Been Been there, done
Mr.
that.
Sanders, that's going to be quoted in the paper, so we need to clarify.
I respect what you do. You make tough decisions. These are one of the tough decisions. The rezoning of 15 acres from P3 neighborhood to P4 mix is just not a good idea. I mean, where you stop that, you don't do a conceptual and you keep going, you vote on it tonight, and then you go to the next step. And you already heard you're going to put half a road in. You don't know how you're going to do the other half. You put 40 cars along a half road. So my question is, before you vote to approve this, why don't you do a traffic study? Check out Farm Street. Check out what's going on with the school system. Check out the pack with the kids, Drew, that you talked about. 165 cars. If you go down right now and try to turn off 95 when you pick kids up, tell me where you're going to go. And then where are these cars going to park alongside Chambers? It's just not a good idea. BSD in favor of it? I don't think BSD's voted on it yet, so I'm not sure that was good information. Somebody might have signed something, but BSD hadn't taken any action on this. I've been, like I said, I've been in your shoes. I've been a developer. I understand developers like to make as much money as possible. That doesn't mean they won't do a good development. It just means if you put more units on that property, you make more money. So the P3 to P4 means you make more money. So the best thing to do tonight is not vote to change from P3 to P4. Just leave it the same, and then you'll kill the deal. So that's all I got to say.
Thank you,
Mayor.
Mr. Sanders. Melinda Larson? Ms. Larson, if you'll state your name and address.
My name is Lindy Larson, and my address is 1320 Farm Street. The developer said those apartments are unique to our neighborhood. No, they aren't. They're not unique at all, because our current houses that are there now are what is unique. My home was built in 1890 and has been in my family for 43 years. It sits less than 100 feet from this proposed development. There are no three-story homes currently, and there are no quadplexes. But if this historic area gets rezoned to a P4 mix, that's what the entire area will be. 15-plus acres of downtown historical Airedale farm lots to build 5 2- and 3-story apartment buildings with 120 1, 2, and 3 multifamily apartment units with future plans of a total of 11 buildings on site, 165 parking spaces with street parallel parking starting at Farm Street all the way to Cedar Street. That's called street parking or a parking lot. The problems are traffic. This area will become what's known as a full impact traffic area and in an already high-density traffic area. Has the developer or the city done a traffic study? 15-plus acres are in a designated floodplain. It has a history of flooding. 2015 Memorial Day flood, $800,000 of estimated repairs. October 2015, May 2016, April 2016, and an ongoing and continuous threats of flooding. Do you know the impact of the amount of rain running off roofs of 11 buildings and 165 parking places? Has the city done a drainage study for this, or the developer for this 15 acres? The property was the home of a wrecking yard for over 50 years, where cars were crushed on site and radiators were pulled and sold and drained directly into the ground. Have we done a soil study? If the answer is no, how on earth can we make any decision based on what we don't know? Farm Street Village is not smart growth. The city of Bastrop needs to fix the current problems. I myself walked the neighborhood. I got the signature of 120, maybe 30 people opposing this. Nobody wants it. And before we continue to add more to the existing problems, stopped up gutters, flooding through our neighborhoods, I believe this apartment complex belongs in a P5 core zoned area. Our P3 zone neighborhood is important to Bastrop. It's relevant and a major player in Bastrop historical significance.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. All right, the next person signed up to speak is Linda Smith. Oh, do not wish to speak, opposed, sorry. Next person signed up to speak is Daniel Smith. She looked at me with really, no, don't make me talk. Sorry, didn't mean to, may have made your heartbeat fast, and I was not intending to do that. All right, Mr. Smith, if you'll give us your name and address.
My name's Daniel Smith. My wife is Linda Cruz Smith. We live on 1504 Cedar Street. My wife and her family have been living on this property for over 79 years. I am here with my friends and neighbors. We are here tonight to voice our opposition for changing the zoning code of P3 to P4 and for development of 120 apartment complexes between Farm Street and Cedar Street. I have two major problems with this development of the apartment complexes. First of all, is traffic control. Traffic control is a nightmare on Cedar Street, especially on 95 during the following hours, beginning and ending of school hours, events at the Performing Arts Center, and games at Earhart Stadium. There are times I can't even get out of my driveway. And same thing for our neighbor, Chuck Hughes. He can't even get out of his driveway at times. And now, with 165 cars, it's going to get worse. At the last Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, there was not one mention of solving this problem. The second problem is the property is in a flood zone. Commissioner Harris of the Zoning Commission regarding this problem, he said it best. It's in a flood zone, and it was once a junkyard. Several Planning Commission members asked several questions regarding this problem. One commissioner said, we need more study on this problem. If we allowed 120 apartment complexes built on 5 buildings, add more paved streets, and more 165 parking lots and crosswalk, where will the water going to go? According to one of our neighbors who live across 95, he told me that water is going to cross 95 to his yard. Conclusion, most of us neighbors have been living in this neighborhood for a long time. We love this neighborhood, we care for it. We plan to live and stay here. Otherwise, the apartment developers don't care about our neighborhood. They just want to build these apartments and go on to the next project. For these reasons, we do not want to change the P3 to P4 apartments, P3, and have these apartments built. And again, I want to thank you for allowing me to voice my opposition.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith, Pablo Cerna. Mr. Cerna, if you'd state your name and address.
Okay, thank you. Pablo Cerna, 1104 Hill Street, near the intersection of Farm Street, not too far away from this site. So good evening. I'm here tonight to state my support for the rezoning of 1500 Farm Street from P3 to P4. Bastrop is a growing town. Development is here. And we had the foresight to update our land development code. Its stated goal, create a fiscally sustainable community through land use standards that are authentically Bastrop and geographically sensitive. I'd like to make a few points with this goal in mind. We have a form-based code. A form-based code is just as it sounds, a code that is centered on a building's form in relation to the site, as opposed to the former code that regulated development based on use. Before this change, almost any shape and building form could happen as long as it met the minimum setbacks. Now we have form in mind when we do our development. Point 2, trust the process. We have taken a quantum leap forward with the implementation of the B3 codes compared to the older codes. We are finally getting developers on board with this process as evident by the initial concept site plan. Through the use of the pattern book, we can see the design intent, building massing, and site layout at the early stages. This is the first of many steps to ensure we have a project that holistically fits in this neighborhood. All 15.8 acres, this is a key point. This site is adjacent to P4 already. 3, multifamily is not what many think it is with this B3 codes. B3 will not allow large-scale superblocks of buildings in residential neighborhoods. B3 will encourage a walkable development that engages its surroundings. This is a vital component of an enduring neighborhood. Affordable, walkable workforce housing does not need to look like a bland government project. With B3, we can have a beautiful building and more affordable housing. And last point, we need a diversity of housing stock to ensure economic viability. One of the DNAs of the B3 code recognized was the diverse lot sizes, all within the traditional city block that makes up this part of historic Bastrop. By allowing the rezoning of this property, there will be another level of socioeconomic strata introduced, and all within walking distance of some of the best art and entertainment districts our city has to offer. So in closing, we know this development will have to jump through many hoops, like drainage, traffic impact analysis, et cetera, but this development has the potential to be a boon for the area and will keep Bastrop authentic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cerna. I have Nathan Anderson at 805 Main that does not wish to speak but is opposed. I have Betty Warren at 1811 Chambers that does not wish to speak but is opposed. I don't want anyone else to give me the look that you did, Ms. Smith, with the eye. Catherine Albers.
I'm not very good at this, but my name is Catherine Albers. I live at 1307 Pecan Street. I've lived there for 41 years, and I guess I've always felt that my house is safe where we are, but when I read that little notice about the P3 becoming P4, I said that this apartment complex is too close. I'm really worried that if you begin rezoning, it's just going to continue. And like Mr. Kraut said, you've paid a lot of money to have this zoning done. Keep it P3. I'm concerned about the off-street parking, Chambers, Cedar and Farm Street is, the parking is horrible, the school pickup is horrible. People at Mina, the parents start driving up at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and parking and do not let their cars, they keep their cars running until 2:45. And it's a mess, and I can imagine what will happen if this complex is built. And I think that this development is too close to the high school and elementary. They do not need to be, this type of apartment complex should not be that close to those buildings. And I guess the main reason I'm speaking tonight too is we need to have respect for the people that live close in that proximity to this property. I do not want 120 units in my backyard. Some of these people that live here, that is what's going to happen to them. The Smiths are going to have every car from Chambers Street going by them. Lindy is going to have a apartment building 5 buildings in her backyard. Sherry's not here tonight. Sherry Hoskins is going to have it in her backyard. If you want this in your backyard, bring it to them. I do not want this in my backyard. And as far as the parking, another thing I was going to say, 165. I have 4 children. At one time, we had 6 cars at our house. So don't sit there and say, when you have 1, 2, and 3, that you're going to get by. There are a few people that walk in this town. I walk and run around this town every day. This is not a walking town, I can tell you that. They start off walking in the spring when it's cool, when it gets hot, they stop. I see you running too, so I know you're a runner. People start running in the fall.
I don't run as far as you do.
Well, but I'm slow. People run in the fall when it gets cooler. When it's going to get real cold, you won't see them again. So don't tell me they're making this to be walking. People will not walk to the store. You'll get in your car and go. But thank you. Please keep it P3 for the sake of Bastrop. Keep it historical and for the neighbors that live right by this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Albers. Emily, is it Huth? All right. Yeah. Oh, but she does not wish to speak. She is opposed. I was so happy I said it correctly. James Foreman lives at 1504 Farm Street, does not wish to speak and is opposed. Christy Foreman also lives at 1504 Farm Street, does not wish to speak and is opposed. Nancy Huth lives at 1303 Cedar Street, does not wish to speak and is opposed. Darren Kesselis wishes to speak. If you please state your name and address.
Honorable Mayor, council members, Richard Darren Kesselis. Pick whichever Kesselis you like and think of me during that time. Richard's my dad. If you like Kenny, he's my uncle, if you like him. My aunt Tony, we've been around for a long time. I live at 705 Farm Street. The house that I live in was the Kyle house, and that it was inherited by my grandparents from my great Aunt Margaret, and then my dad and my uncle inherited it, and then I bought it from them because they were going to sell it, and I didn't want it to be sold. That was like 20-something years ago. And it's been there since 1870, 1880, depends on which document you're looking at. I want to talk to you about the infrastructure on Farm Street. Because of several things that have changed and things that are changing, Reed Sharp is putting a new drive-through, which I think is going to be very nice, done with the gas station. That's the block over on Spring Street. That's going to increase traffic from where it was over in the corner by the library to a center part of that block. So you have that. I'm not opposed to that. Reed's a good guy, and I might have a tiny bit of stock in the bank. Tiny. If you go, I would encourage each one of you to drive down Farm Street 4 different times during the day, on a weekday, and 4 different times on a weekend. Because of the traffic across, and Councilwoman Peterson, you're correct, with the railroad tracks, it does already cause a bottleneck from time to time. Between that and the daycare, which now has the parking lot closed at the Methodist Church, Pastor Leggett and all the people on my block talked to him, and he said it was going to be safer for the kids to be loading on the street, which we respectfully disagree about. So we're going to have all that traffic coming across. You're going to have all the kids coming and using Chambers Street, if it's 2 ways, to cut across. I've taught driver ed. I know what that means when they're coming from the high school because it bottlenecks on 95. So we have that. We have the infrastructure for that Farm Street is lacking. We have the loading dock over by the post office annex that has patches on top of patches on top of patches where it needs a concrete pad all the way across, and that's the main thoroughfare to the Fisherman's Park. So when you put all that stress on Farm Street, it's too much stress, and I get that. What I would recommend is the city offer the people some a really nice profit, whatever the city's allowed to offer, eminent domain it, and put the pickleball court there. Okay? You can't clap. Don't get in trouble. So basically, I would ask you not to approve the variance, but I'm not just trying to be NIMBY. I'm not just trying to say not in my backyard. If it has to be, it would be IMBY, which is in my backyard with infrastructure needed put in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kesselis. We'll let council remain silent on which Kesselis is their favorite. So, well. All right. Charles Huth, 1303 Cedar, does wish to speak. Mr. Huth, if you'll state your name and address.
And I do live at 1303 Cedar here in Bastrop. Good evening. Madam Mayor, council members. Folks here tonight will speak of increased vehicular and pedestrian traffic on already 2 narrow roads. They will speak about noise and light pollution, but I want to talk about neighbors. Neighborhoods typically are part of a larger community. Our neighborhood is only unique in that we and our neighbors consider it so. My mother and her mother and father were proud of their Bastrop community and passed along that pride to us and our children. My great-grandfather built his house in about 1870 where the packed parking lot is. My grandfather and his brother constructed houses on Fayette Street adjacent to our family home. 65 years ago, when my grandmother's pipes froze, it was a neighbor in her 60s from across the street who carried 2 gallons of water over to her. She had gotten that water from the only source of water she had, a standpipe with a hose bib in her yard. When we spoke to the city council 26 years ago about building a house on our land, they assured us that Bastrop needed more single-family dwellings and welcomed us. When my wife and I could not be home because we both worked during the day, and our neighbor, Billy Reed, recently deceased, heard that our school-aged daughter would be home alone, he made sure that she had his phone number close at hand. When we had the big freezing snow cover this year, it was our neighbors, the Smiths, down the street on the other side of the school who checked on us. Apartment complexes can sometimes be necessary. They have, we are sure, some genuinely nice people in them, but somehow I cannot contemplate that they are the kind of neighbors I just described. We want good neighbors, and we want to be good neighbors. Neighbors have been mentioned from biblical times to the present, but we want neighbors for our community, not statistics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Heath. Cam Chavez. Mr. Chavez, if you'd state your name and address.
Sure. Mayor, staff, city manager. Trey, you have the toughest job. You get to be the messenger and get out the questions after. Cam Chavez, 1401 Pecan Street. So I didn't come prepared with a speech or anything. Some of you may or may not know I served as chair of EDC for a few years, served on planning and zoning. So I'm just going to say a few buzzwords if I can get my notes up here that I've heard today and that I've also, in doing my research. Parking, traffic, green space maintenance, size, requirements of Gills Branch, P3 versus P4, quadplex, duplex, triplex, apartment complex. Preservation of the past, progress for the future. It's a tough balancing act, extremely tough balancing act. How do we progress? By preserving. You have the toughest job in deciding all these words I used that were used tonight by all of you and everyone sitting here. So the question I ask, that if we cannot viably answer every one of those questions by that up there, I'm not in favor of it. Am I opposed to affordable housing? Absolutely not. Do I think we need some sort of housing? Yes, I do. I think there are teachers that don't have a place to reside, and I have kids going to public school here, and I want them to have teachers, right? But I also believe that everything has to be sustainable. If we cannot sustain what we are putting in our city, it'll eventually fade. Just think about buying a home. You buy a home, you're excited, you do front lawn, you check the maintenance, you paint the house. 2 years later, house doesn't look as shiny. The grass gets a little taller. That onus is on you, and you're the homeowner. This onus falls on all of us as taxpayers. This is our land. This is our city. Collectively, we have to make the right decision. I'm opposed for this because when I use all those buzzwords, I don't think we've solved and answered all those questions. I applaud the effort for the applicant and all the work they've done. However, I'm not convinced that they understand preservation of the past and progress for the future. So I challenge not only all of our citizens, but all of our developers, all the people who wish that we want to come to Bastrop, to please hold that in mind, and that we ask that you uphold the standard that we uphold for ourselves. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez. Gary Moss. Name and address.
Gary Moss, 1706 Wilson and 1708 Wilson. I'll point that out again for a particular reason. Preservation of the past, progress for the future. If anybody understands that, I think that's me in this town. I think we're going past, and everybody's way out on their skis on this whole thing with being concerned about it, because there's a process to take care of all the problems that have been brought up tonight. But I want to talk about the past for a minute. When we came to Bastrop 5 years ago, we bought a little rent house. When we're going around town talking to people about what we were going to do with it and stuff, people almost accosted us over the fact, you have a rent house? Oh, I need to rent it. Well, it's not for rent. Remember 10 years ago, I guess now, the fire that displaced so many people around here. There was no place for any of them to live. And affordable housing, is a very important thing. And for the future, the progress for the future is, unfortunately, is going to be multiple dwellings. It's the way it's going. People can't afford to buy a $380,000 medium-priced home here in this town, just a single house. The growth is going to come from that. There's people rushing to Bastrop, and they need places to live. And I'm supporting, changing the P3 to P4. And just by doing that alone does not get this project completely off the ground. And there's a process that will take care of most of the concerns they have here. But let's not forget the past when we had such a problem here, and we need affordable housing for people. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Moss. Anne Marie Schindler? Oh, does not wish to speak. Opposition. Okay, I also had cards from the two developers. Is there anything that you guys want to add? I was taking notes, and one of the questions that I would like you to address, because I've heard it a junkyard, I've heard it a wrecking yard, but can you guys speak to any environmental studies that have been done or where we stand on that? Because I don't think that's a topic we've covered this evening yet.
Sure, I would be happy to, and I'm assuming this is my 3 minutes. Is that correct? I don't want to ramble on that, so I'm just checking, but I do want to add a few things. Once again, thank you all for hearing us. Thank you all for coming and participating. I really like Bastrop, which is one of the reasons I want to be here. I'm going to go over some of the features that I think that we are bringing to the table on this development, but I've been doing this too long to not finally get a chance to address the fact that, quote, all developers care about is money. If all I cared about was money, I would be out at that site next to the Home Depot or the Walmart or whatever it is that's already zoned, and I would be putting a box there. What I care about is providing a decent place for decent human beings to live. My sister could qualify for affordable housing. She needs affordable housing. I'm not building something that I don't want my own kin to live in. So that's really important to me, and I hope that when people think about this, they won't just categorize every developer as the same thing. I am in this because I love building things. I love building neighborhoods. I love building communities. And I love coming to a place like this where people are passionate about it and respectful. You run a great meeting, Mayor. So very quickly, to answer your questions about the environmental, we had a Phase 1 ESA done for this. It did not turn up anything that required further investigation. All of our reports will have expired by the time we get to building anything here. We will need new reports. If a new Phase 1 ESA turns up anything, we will have a Phase 2 ESA. Then, if that turns up anything, we will do a documented remediation of any known problems. We have done redevelopments and rehabs, so we've had to do that with lead and asbestos before. We know how to remediate substances that are toxic and to do it under all federal guidelines. We would have to meet that for our funding sources regardless. Not to mention, I don't want to put a person on top of a site that's toxic. That would just make me a terrible human being, and I'm not interested in being that. The other things I just wanted to mention very quickly, we really felt like our concept was consistent with the B3 code. I think that code is super cool. We started this process before it had even passed. We had to wait a few months for it to pass. We've read it, we looked at it. I went to planning school. It's amazing. It's an incredibly progressive thing that the city has done. We want to comply with your guidelines. If we need to build more parking, we will find a way to add more parking. If we need to do something about drainage, we will do that. That is why we're going through this city process. The things that we've really tried hard to do in that, and maybe we're just not there yet, are balance the draining, the desire for walkability, and the need for units at the site. So, you know, those are our big things. In my dream scenario, we would also have, you know, a pollinator-friendly garden, a pickleball court, and a pool, because I think Bastrop needs a pool, and we would partner with the YMCA and have kids get swimming lessons there. But, you know, that's my dream fantasy. We can't do it all in one concept meeting. And I have other people to convince, you know, of the worthwhileness of those items. We've already told you we're trying to be architecturally consistent with the historic fabric. We can't build a new historic building. I wish we could, but we can build one that looks like a historic building. So we're willing to continue working on that. And then once again, we were designing for walkability. We're a 16-minute walk to Maxine's and a 6-minute walk to Mena Elementary School. So, you know, hopefully any new residents at this site wouldn't be contributing to the traffic that's already there. I can guarantee you, though, if they live, I don't know, that way or another way and have to drive to the school, they definitely will contribute to it if they don't live next door. I think that's about it. I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm really passionate about this project and about what I do. And, you know, the other thing I want to say is I'm also a resident of a neighborhood. I own a home. I live in an older neighborhood in Austin. I have construction in my neighborhood. I have new housing. I have proposals for development. As a resident, I understand, you know, what people are saying, what people face when these things come. And just because you are a developer does not also mean you're not a person, a denizen of a community, a person who lives there, who cares what happens there. And that's just important for me to say for me, not for anything else. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Andre. Sally, is there anything else that you would like to say? Okay. All right. Council, I had told you that there were other folks that had sent some stuff in, and I want to be respectful, and I'll say their name and address. John Larson at 1320 Farm Street did not wish to speak, was opposed. Diane Weir at 1301 Hill Street did not wish to speak, was opposed. A lot of people at 1306. Don Thomas at 1306 Farm Street did not wish to speak, was opposed. Robert Orologio, can anyone help me? All right, we're going with that. 1306 did not wish to speak, was opposed. Tawny, that same name, 1306 Farm Street, does not wish to speak, was opposed. Donna Newell at 1305 Farm Street does not wish to speak, was opposed. Jana Hellbush at 1408 Hill Street did not wish to speak, was opposed. William Holford at 1308 Pecan Street did not wish to speak, was opposed. James Foreman, I think I already called his name. Christy Foreman, I think I called her name as well. Carl and Ruth Spooner, 1409 Jefferson, did not wish to speak, was opposed. Cheryl Lee at 801 Laurel wished to speak in favor, but because of death of a very close friend's father, she would be traveling and wasn't able to speak tonight. And she was in favor of the item, but wants to make sure that the traffic is addressed. Larry Albers at Bastrop, Texas, is the address. Does not wish to speak, was opposed. Heard from Cam. Michelle Habeck, does not wish to speak and didn't say whether she was, I do not support, okay. The comments say I do not support, but they didn't answer on the other line. Nicole Albers at 1104 Ebert Avenue, Austin, Texas, does not wish to speak and was opposed. Is there anyone else that has filled out paperwork and I didn't call your name? I appreciate, we live in a community where we're all better off when we all participate, and so I really appreciate you guys spending your Tuesday evening with me. Council, I want to bring to your attention that we get to make some tough decisions, and one of the things that we have done in the past that sometimes works successfully is asking the developer to meet with the citizens. One of the things that I'm hearing is the parking along Chambers Street. It was put in because staff asked them to do it, and the neighborhood saying, no, we don't want that kind of parking. So sometimes there's some of those things that can be done. I don't know if the developer's interested in doing that. I don't know if the neighbors are interested in doing that. One of the things that exists that we all know is people have private property rights, and when someone else owns the property, all property within a city limits is zoned, and there's work that can be done, and there is a proposal that can be made that they're not coming to council and getting a vote because they're following all the rules and not asking for a variance. And sometimes you have to be careful what you ask for. So I'm wanting us to make sure that we address everything. And also, and the city attorney will help me because I don't want to mislead anyone. Let me start with, is there anyone else, I didn't call your name, anyone else who filled out paperwork? Then I'm officially closing the public hearing at 8:12 p.m. This is posted for the first reading of the ordinance. We can take a motion, but the way that this works is there will be a second reading at the next council meeting, and that's where we will take a vote that matters. This is the first step in the process. Did I say that correctly, Mr. Attorney?
That's correct, Mayor. There's no vote scheduled for tonight. Our charter requires that it be read in terms of the caption to the ordinance at two separate hearings, or two separate meetings.
And will there be a public hearing at the second reading?
There's no requirement under state law or the code to have a second public hearing, but we do have the state law citizen comment period on any agenda item.
And council could always choose to have a public hearing again as
Absolutely.
well. One of the things that happens in public hearings, so you'll know, we spend your tax dollars because there's things that we have to post in the paper for public hearings. So making it an official public hearing, there's a cost that goes along with that, but certainly there is state law that allows folks to sign up for items that are listed on the agenda. So council could choose to hear from folks at the second council meeting without it being a formally posted public hearing.
That's correct. Law requires two public hearings, one at P&Z and one at City Council. This satisfies that. It'll come back to a future council meeting for a second reading, and there'll be citizen comment periods at that time.
We always want to remain legal and dot all the i's and cross all the t's, but that doesn't mean that we can't go above and beyond. So I'm just trying to make sure that we give folks an opportunity. All right, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson, I see you reaching for the mic.
Well, just some clarification needed from the city attorney. So we're only tonight, we're not approving the concept plan, we're just approving the reading and the process, am I correct?
Technically, Mayor Pro Tem, you're not approving anything tonight. Technically, we're just having the first reading of the ordinance and a public hearing. Council's free to deliberate if you choose to, but there's no actual approval taking place tonight. The approval can take place after we've had that second reading, which is currently scheduled to be at your next city council meeting.
Which is November 9th.
November 9th.
Now, Madam Mayor, I would suggest that we withhold any action tonight and look for the opportunity for more questions and perhaps a meeting between the residents and the developer, and then go for the second reading and take whatever action is needed at that point.
All right, so with that, there is no motion on the floor, and we know that we will be coming back for the second reading on November 9th. It is 8:15. Is anyone opposed to a small break? Does any council member want to make a further comment before we have our break? Councilmember Crouch?
I would to the developer. So I really applaud you for taking the time to put the drawings together in the whole package and the design process. I know that you've put a lot of thought into the whole thing, and I think it's a great idea, except for maybe the location of it. Bastrop is in desperate need for public housing. There's just none available. Even the new items that they've built recently are full, and I hope you continue and do exactly what you're doing, because that's what you do for a living. But I just want to commend you for what, you know, the package you presented and input you've provided to us for that.
Thank you, Councilmember Crouch. Councilmember Jackson?
You almost said exactly what I wanted to say. I mean, I'm not opposed to more housing because it's definitely a need in our community, but I think the location in this particular instance is not the proper location for it. The project itself is very worthy. It's nice. It's needed. But because of the neighborhood and because of the neighborhood and the people that are in the neighborhood, I just don't think it's a right fit for us. So I'm hoping that the developer with this project might find another location possibly, and I think there is other land that's available that would be more suitable for that. But I just wanted to say that I'm not opposed to any new housing because the growth is coming and the people will need a place to live, but the location is just not the right one as far as I'm concerned. And of course, listening to the overwhelming decision of the citizens and the neighbors, I think they concur with that.
Council, any other comments? All right, we are done with item 12D. It is 8:17 and we'll take a 5-minute break. And I would respectfully ask, we got 3 more pages of agenda. If you would please exit. I know you want to visit with each other, but we got to finish our meeting tonight. Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you. I was so nervous.
All right, Colin gave me the thumbs up. It is 8:24. We are back in regular session. Colin, be ready. We're going to be jumping all over the place. All right, we're going to go to item 7E, a proclamation of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, recognizing November 5th, 2021 as Bastrop Arbor Day. Yay! Come forward, Robert. All right, whereas Arbor Day is observed throughout the world in many languages and cultures, all across Texas, as Texans, we value our trees. Oh my goodness, do we value our trees here in Bastrop. We encourage people in our community to plant trees and celebrate them on the first Friday each November on Texas Arbor Day. Whereas this holiday for trees is an opportunity to teach fundamental lessons about the stewardship of our natural resources and caring for our environment, is an opportunity to learn what each of us can do to keep our community trees healthy and vibrant, and it is time we can pause and appreciate the trees in our lives. I love that. Whereas trees, wherever they are planted, are a source of joy and enjoyment. Now, therefore, I, Connie Schrader, Mayor of the City of Bastrop, do hereby recognize November 5th, 2021 as Arbor Day in the City of Bastrop, and I do thereby encourage all citizens to cherish our trees and recognize their important role in the environment. In witness whereof, I have set my hand and caused the official seal of the City of Bastrop to be affixed this 26th day of October. We have representation from our Parks Board, from our city arborist, and our Public Works Director. So we're going to take a picture, and you guys are going to applaud for them. Okay. Next, we're going to go to item 12E. He was looking for that one. Item 12E, top of page 4, consider action to approve resolution number R 2021-101 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, authorizing proceeding with issuance of certificates of obligation and further directing the publication of notice of intention to issue City of Bastrop, Texas combination tax and revenue certificates of obligation series 2022. Ms. Waldron.
I don't have a clicker, but.
Clicker, anybody got a clicker? Trey, clicker?
During the budget process, we were talking about this certificate of obligations, and just kind of to briefly remind council, what we put in the budget document was 1.6. These are all estimates for Old Austin Highway, and the additional $2 million for street reconstruction. Those streets will be prioritized yet again after we do a new pavement condition index, and so I'll let Dan take over from here.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, Council, City Manager. Dan Wegmiller with Specialized Public Finance. The process starts today with a notification going to the paper that runs 2 consecutive weeks. We will get the rating established and affirmed as the timeline on the screen shows in December. We plan to come back to you on January 11th at your council meeting to present the bids we received that morning and then ask for your action. Once that takes place on the 11th, we would close and money would be in your account on February 3rd. So I'm glad to take any questions, or I'll be back on January 11th.
I'm glad that we're issuing them. I have a feeling that interest rates are only going one way with inflation. Yeah. Happy to entertain a motion, should anyone be so inclined.
I move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilmember Rogers and a second from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson to approve resolution number R 2021-101. Is there any further deliberation? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson?
Yes.
Councilmember Crouch?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Council. We're moving on to item 12H at the bottom or kind of middle of page 4. Consider action to approve resolution number R 2021-104, the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Schneider Engineering LLC for a broadband feasibility study, which I'm super excited about, that I'm trying to influence anyone, for $47,000 as shown in Exhibit A, including a severability clause and establishing an effective date. Mr. Job.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Happy to take an easy one here. Essentially, this is something we talked about during the budget time, doing this feasibility and broadband study. Here it is before you. The real components is a market and regulatory analysis. We'll talk about infrastructure feasibility. We'll also talk about operational feasibility, and then a type of deployment plan. That's what this is going to define for us, for the low price of $47,000. With that, I'll take any questions.
And
Councilmember Rogers.
And this is already in our budget, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just want to make sure that
I believe
was
it's
clear.
on page 170.
I was just making sure.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
I mean, this seems to be a pretty aggressive timeline. Do we feel comfortable with that, of having a complete feasibility study done by March?
So we also have our consultant here, and I'm going to let him answer that question since he's going to be working on the schedule.
Well, he stayed for 2 hours. He might as well say something.
Thank you. My name is Steve Moffett with Schneider Engineering. Yes, our firm's been looking at studies like this for quite some time. I feel like we can accomplish it in the time frame that you guys have laid out. It's a feasibility study, so we're not developing a business case for it, but we will develop a revenue model and then look at some of the alternative scenarios that we'll talk about with the staff. So.
I love it, because I think we should strike while the iron is hot before the legislature comes back into session.
We'll definitely have it done before, unless they call a special session, we'll have it before they get back in session. So.
As council, I know personally I brought up the broadband being a need back in 2018, and we talked about needing a feasibility report, so I'm thrilled to see that we're taking that step. Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Madam Mayor, I move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion to approve from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson and a second from Councilmember Peterson. Is there any further deliberation? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson?
Yes.
Councilmember Crouch?
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes.
And we're going to go right above that, 12G, consider action to approve resolution number R 2021-103 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, awarding a contract to provide professional engineering services for the Drainage Master Plan Project with Half and Associates, Inc., in the amount of $284,609 as attached as Exhibit A, authorizing the city manager to execute all necessary documents, providing for a repealing clause, and establishing an effective date. Council, you had at the dais a copy of this resolution because it was accidentally left out of your packet. So it has a pink sticky on it, and it says item 12G, and this is the resolution that we're considering. Fabiola.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I have before you tonight a professional services contract for your consideration and approval for the Drainage Master Plan Project. I would like to start by providing you with a little bit of background on some of the studies that the city has been involved. And in March of 2018, the county, in coordination with the Texas Water Development Board and as part of their flood protection planning, has done studies in the Gills Branch and the Piney Creek watersheds. The studies provide a detailed floodplain analysis, identified flood risk areas, and developed flood mitigation alternatives. In addition, in April 2020, the Texas Water Development Board provided additional updates in the Gills Branch and the Piney Creek watershed studies, updating with the 2017 LIDAR and also the Atlas rainfall data. This means best available data to date, and the city was an active participant in the flood risk review of the updated floodplains. So as we are all aware, the city of Bastrop has been experiencing tremendous growth, and with that, we have been having a steady increase in population and also increase in the commercial sector. And with development, we have seen an increase in stormwater runoff to our streams and drainage systems. So the drainages, the city is taking a proactive approach to prepare this drainage master plan that will serve as a tool to the city to more effectively plan and implement drainage improvements to reduce flood risk to the benefit of its residents, also to develop a comprehensive evaluation of the existing drainage and infrastructure, focus on local drainage problems and leverage the watershed floodplain studies, and also include public engagement, which will gather cities' inputs and concerns. The project will include cities' limits and 1 mile ETJ. It also includes 4 areas of study: the hydrologic and hydraulic analysis, incorporate existing watershed studies and existing conditions, and will also assist in the CIP development. It will identify and prioritize flood-prone areas, recommend solutions, and prioritize CIP drainage projects. In 2018, the city published a request for qualifications for professional services. We selected Half Associates for the drainage-related projects. Staff recommend continue utilizing Half for their familiarity with the drainage studies within the county, and also because of the quality of their work. We have a representative from Half with us here tonight, is Paul Morales.
He's the other side. Right there.
We have $285,000 in available funds for this project. This professional services contract is for $284,609. The funding source is coming from the Limited Tax Note 2021. With your approval tonight, we intend to submit a notice to proceed in November, and we estimate the completion of the project to be 14 months within the notice to proceed. With that, the Engineering and Capital Project Management Department and Public Works recommend City Council to authorize the approval of the professional services contract for the drainage master plan.
We don't have to read the numbers
Okay,
again.
thank you.
We're there. All right, staff, any questions? Council, any
Yes.
questions for staff? Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
I was just wondering why Paul couldn't spend $391 more of that. No, I really don't have a question. I really appreciate the work done on this, because I think this is a coalescence of all the work that we've done, so we have that single document for us to refer to in addressing these drainage issues. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Councilmember Crouch?
I just wanted to ask a question that was asked of me today, and I couldn't answer it, so maybe you two guys can answer it, so, or girls and guys. They asked, one, why we continue to do drainage studies, and of course, the answer is so we can get the drainage out of the city, or the water out of the city. And the second one was, when you do the study, do you take into consideration the maintenance of the waterways, or debris in waterways, and road construction? So let's say there was a catastrophic flood that happens this year, and we have all the construction under the highway. What is the process of that? Do you take that into consideration for a cause of part of the flooding, or is it just an aerial view of the flood that day and you see the limits of it? Can you explain that? And then I can explain it to whoever asked me that.
Mayor, Council, I'm Paul Morales with Half Associates. I'm the project manager on this drainage master plan. What we typically do, we'll look at the entire city, specifically within the older portion of town, because the newer portions have the new criteria that the developers are being held to. So this older area of town, we're going to use a 2D model to determine drainage patterns and come up with drainage CIP projects. As far as construction that's ongoing, typically those construction projects have their own erosion control, and so they're kind of their own isolated little project. Once it's complete, everything should be stable. Any debris that does get captured is probably because of their erosion and sediment controls that are left behind that they didn't take out. But we don't typically look at ongoing construction. It's only what is currently existing within the city. If there are projects that are ongoing that are close to being completed, we'll start to take those into consideration. But the whole goal is to come up with drainage CIP projects that the city can implement in a planning fashion over the next 5-10 years, depending on funding.
Mr. Morales, isn't it also true that part of why we need to do that master study plan is when you apply for grants, the very first thing they want to know is, have you done a master study plan, so that they know that the money is going in a good direction and you're not just chasing small problems?
Right, so that's a good point that we didn't bring up on these slides, but the state is working on a state flood plan. And so we work closely with the Texas Water Development Board. As we develop these projects, for instance, the Gills Branch project, flood protection project, the ones that we developed for Piney Creek as well, we've already submitted those as projects for the state flood plan. They're going to be incorporated for the entire state to come up with amount of money that's needed for legislature to identify projects. And those projects will be, at some point in the future, be eligible for that funding. To get implemented within the state, county, and different municipalities throughout the state. As we move forward with this project, we're working closely with them on the state flood plan. We can incorporate these drainage projects as part of the state flood plan that can be eligible for funding.
And Mayor, that was my answer, is that, we use those studies to apply for grants and get grants, and the same with the parks, same thing. So you do or you don't take in consideration, so let's just, for an example, do you take in consideration the size of the inlet? So let's say somebody throws their lazy boy out in the bar ditch and it floats down and then plugs up the drainage culvert on Chestnut Street. Do you take in consideration the size of that culvert as contributing to the part of the cause of the flooding and maintenance of the waterways, I guess? Does that make sense or no?
Right. Well, I can tell you how we pay attention to maintenance. So anything that is considered a public improvement in the public waterway, the public works guys take care of that. They build that into their annual budget as CIP projects come on. As it relates to this study, they will propose additional funding sources that will allow us to fund that future maintenance. As it relates to private drainage improvements, with our stormwater drainage manual, we require them to have their own maintenance agreement and standard operating procedures for cleaning out after each storm.
So let me take a shot at this. No, they aren't counting on, the city's not doing any maintenance and everything's half clogged, because that's not that's not the shape that it's supposed to be in. That falls on the onus of the city to be cleaning out the lazy boy that fell out. And the taxpayer could not afford to design and put in infrastructure for half of it being clogged all the time.
Yeah.
So that's not how they do it. It's based on,
Yes.
if it's a 36-inch pipe, they're counting on it's a 36-inch pipe at this grade, and this is how much water can go through there. When they do the analysis of what's gravity flowing to that point, if they decide really what you need is two 36-inch pipes, then the additional 36-inch pipe is identified as a CIP project, and they start looking for funding for that additional pipe. But not if that additional pipe is needed because there's a lazy boy in front of the first pipe.
Yeah. Okay, so
Does
it's
that
just based
help?
on water flow, normal.
It's based
normal
on the,
conditions,
it's based on the
everything's clean.
system, exactly. Because the onus is on the municipality. That's why we have a public works department. That's why we have, people have the ability to call in and say there's been something wrong. That's why we do public education to not shove your grass clippings down the inlet. So there's public education on what not to wash down the drainage storm system, that type of thing. But there's no city, no municipality that can afford a drainage infrastructure system that counted on it being a third to a half clogged all the time because people don't behave properly.
Yeah, and I agree with the training and the entire stormwater prevention plans that need to be implemented on the construction projects, and Mr. Hoffman and I have talked about that before. But yeah, thanks for answering that, Trey and Mayor. Thank you.
Absolutely. Councilmember Jackson?
Well, after hearing the project manager and our mayor/engineer speak to the merits of this, I would move for approval.
I have a motion to approve Resolution 2021-103 from Councilmember Jackson.
Second.
And a second from Councilmember Crouch. Is there any further discussion, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yes, ma'am. Paul, my understanding of what we're considering tonight is this is less a study than it is a plan to implement some of the findings of the various studies. Am I correct in that? We're kind of done studying.
They're doing a study.
That is correct. We have completed all the riverine studies within the city. We're going to use that as a leverage to identify and come up with projects that will be incorporated into the drainage master plan. But this master plan is a planning effort to identify local flood problem areas that have not already been studied. So we are doing somewhat of a little bit of an analysis, not quite a study, but it's more to identify those flood problem areas within the streets, within the neighborhoods, and try to convey that water to Gills or to Piney to make sure it does drain out with a positive drainage. But
And as you mentioned earlier, that to make it consistent with the state's flood planning,
Exactly.
flood plan also.
Right. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
If I might add to that, just real briefly, we'll end up with projects and not just a list of projects. That'll translate directly, depending on what council action is, into the city CIP.
Right.
We'll have that done in time to potentially inform a November of 2023 bond program if the city decides to stay on that schedule. We'll have a way to objectively rank order those projects. We were intentional in the scope of work to include that. We'll have a simplified approach to benefit cost analysis, which frankly I think has been missing from prior City of Bastrop drainage decision making. It's important to be able to relate the cost of the public improvements to the value of the structures you're trying to protect. And so we'll be given that tool as well with this project.
And if I
it'll
could,
help with the critical path. And I believe, not putting words in your mouth, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson, but I think part of what you were trying to emphasize is although we've done some studies, we are not paying money to restudy something we've already studied. This is next step and filling in the blanks to get us to the point, as the city manager pointed out, so that we can leverage tax dollars to get the biggest benefit.
And one thing I do want to add to Mr. Hoffman's comments is that we will develop a list of CIP projects for drainage We'll score them. We're going to prioritize them. But one thing I like to do, especially for cities, is you got crews that can do small work. So let's peel out that small drainage work that could be done, and then keep the larger projects for the big contractors that need to get in and do excavation. So I like to separate those two projects.
Excellent. I have a motion and a second. Is there any further deliberation? Councilmember Crouch, did you have? Okay. Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Councilmember Crouch.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Paul. Appreciate you staying. Council, I just realized that in the stack that I was given, there was a citizen comment. Is Ryan still here? I think he left. So I'm going back to item 10. The speaker is Ryan Nicholson. Ryan lives at 2105 Dragonfly Loop, and he wanted the topic to be introduced, possible retention wall for water runoff near the skate park that could also serve as a graffiti art wall. So I'm going to give this comment card to the city manager and let him contact Mr. Nicholson and put that on a parks agenda, or let staff work with that. But I apologize to Mr. Nicholson. I know he was here earlier, and I apologize that I missed him. I also see that I have someone signed up to speak for 9A, so we're moving to item 9A at the bottom of page 2. 9A, receive a presentation from Assistant City Manager for Community Development, discuss and provide policy direction on the creation of a municipal utility district. We'll hear the presentation from staff, and then I'll call the person who signed up to speak. Mr. Joe.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Just wanted to start by talking a little bit about the, Colin, can you advance us to this item? Sorry. Essentially, MUDs are addressed currently in our utilities chapter, which is chapter 13, specifically section 13.05. It really does talk a lot about the components of what's required with the petition, but it doesn't give complete policy direction. So we're back here tonight to talk a little bit about this. And with a lot of the recent growth that we've seen, we've actually seen 2 petitions recently for a couple of MUDs in Area B. And we've, as you're well aware, we've already approved 1 PID. We just want to make sure we got clear policy direction and talk about this tonight, and we'll bring it back to you at a later date for approval. So, simple question, what is a MUD? Typically, it's a special district that functions as an independent limited government that is usually to provide utility service to an area that is not served by the city. And the purpose is because it's an alternate way to finance this infrastructure. It can be water, sewer, drainage. It can also include some parks, road facilities, et cetera. Again, how is a MUD created? You can do that through the TCEQ, which again, following a petition and consent process that's required by the Texas Water Code, sorry. And that's usually brought back here for consent. And then it can also be done by a city, or it has the ability to be done in legislature. Some of the conditions for consent, and this is what we really wanted to go through and provide feedback on. These are going to be staff recommendations based on the memo that you saw in your packet, which were the policy considerations. So one of the first steps we believe is that the developer must enter into professional services agreement, just like we did with when the PID was approved, to make sure that all those expenses are borne by the developer and not the city. Again, the areas cannot be within a plan to be annexed within the next 5 years. There needs to be written justification supporting the MUD will benefit the community.
Trey, can you go back one? How's that even applicable since we don't have annexation authority anymore?
So,
I mean, we have no plans to annex anything because we can't annex anything.
Well, sure we can with
voluntary, right?
Sure, yes.
And we do have.
It is very difficult for cities to annex. We still have the ability to annex with a voluntary petition from property owners. And just in the time I've been here, we've seen a couple of those. And so
I understand that, but that's completely different than having an ETJ annexation strategy because we wouldn't be, we don't have any control over the people who come to us with a development agreement, right? They either choose to or they choose not to.
They might be incented
We could, and I understand that, they may want our water and wastewater, but my point being, we may really, really want the property next door, but if the people who own that don't want to develop that, we can't plan, that can't be a critical stepping point for the next annexation, which in the past, it was you went to your 1 mile and then that extended your 1 mile and you had more of a radial or if it wasn't radial, it was a very something specifically driving you annexing. And it's just like we don't have a 5-year plan for annexation, do we?
Sure. No, but we do have an agreement with Bastrop 552, for example.
Right.
Where the annexation would take place within the next 5 years. And I think that's what this is speaking to. We also have several other development agreements on properties in town. And I'm assuming if it's something active, that's what the 5 years.
Well, the reason I'm bringing it up is because when we talked about the Viridian, am I saying that? I always mess
Yes.
up that. I think that's right. Viridian, the neighbors next door were like, you're doing this because you want to annex me, and we can't annex them. So I want
Correct.
us to be really careful about saying we have an annexation plan because that information gets misconstrued and people think that we're trying to gobble up and go after additional subdivisions, and we don't have that ability, right?
We don't have the ability to gobble up subdivisions. We do have the ability to annex. And with some pretty strict state law imposed restrictions. And I think the simple point that is trying to be made by this one particular condition is that it's in the city's best interest if we do plan to annex, very limited with a lot of conditions, but if we do have plans to annex, it is to the city's best interest, it's to the best interest, I would argue, is to the best interest of the people who would be served, that they be served by the city. With utilities, we are trying to reserve that option that we get to serve if we choose to. And in fact, that, as Trey goes through this presentation, I think you'll see that kind of theme throughout, where we want to retain, I'll go ahead and use the word control over utility service where it is legally feasible for us to do so. So in this particular case, if we do have a plan to annex, and you're right, a few years ago, cities had 3 5-year annexation plans. The legislature has thrown that out the window, but that's not to say we don't have plans to annex. Bastrop 552 is an example. West Bastrop Village Mud is an example. I mean, that's years away. The Viridian development is an example. Okay, if that plan's in place, hey, property owner, developer, we plan to provide the utilities.
Gotcha.
Right.
So the point being, if you're in our CCN and your gravity flow to our wastewater treatment plant, it behooves the people who live in those homes to be served by the city of Bastrop rather than having a mud created and they're paying an additional tax.
Correct.
Okay, so that, it's just the wording of that's weird given the legislative changes. Sorry for interrupting.
No,
Keep
no
going.
problem. That's what this is for, to get feedback and ask questions.
Sorry, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson's giving me the look. Mayor
Yes,
Pro
sir.
Tem Nelson.
Regarding that discussion that just occurred, does annexation, whether it be limited, whether it be voluntary or not, does it still not have to be contiguous to city municipal limits?
Yes.
Okay.
So again, we're going to, some of the conditions of consent, and I've shortened these, there's a lot more detail in the actual policy, but the developer must provide some written justification supporting how the MUD's going to benefit the community over a different type of financing mechanism, essentially. And then there's a statement regarding limited purpose annexation, which I think you've already had discussion at before when Creekside MUD came in and spoke to the council and gave a presentation. The project has to or must utilize the city's water and sewer services if they're located in that certificate of convenience and necessity area, which is the CCN. And then upon annexation, if ever, the water, wastewater, and drainage, the road infrastructure that were constructed by the MUD will become city-owned and operated And I'm getting to the next part, that absolutely has to be paid off as well before we would consider that. But the construction and acquisition of the mud, again, the facilities within or whole shall not commence unless the design conforms with the city standards. All right, so we have some city construction standards that we ensure take care of health and safety, that the roads are built in a certain way, things of that nature. The standards also have to conform with the 1445 agreement we have with between the county and the city. And then the request for the mud shall example unique factors such as parkland, for example. If they're doing something outside of that normal, what the mud is allowed to do, they need to state that. Changing the mud boundaries, for example, if we establish the mud and they want to expand at a later date, that comes back through the council for approval again. I think that's a great point in the policy. The mud, should not allow easements to be used for other storm sewer entities. For example, the easements for the city and the mud itself would not be shared in most cases. Right, the mud utilities.
Because it says
Sorry.
shall not allow, and then you said in most cases. So
Sorry, let me
that's kind of,
Without council approval, how about that? So you're right, this absolutely states that we would not share stormwater facilities or easements with that mud. It's a separate utility, right, with a separate taxing entity. Anything outside of that would take council approval. The
what are you
recommendation.
really trying to address?
Trying to address shared easements with the mud. Protecting our easements, correct.
So if, the point being, we wouldn't have someone dedicate an easement to the city of Bastrop for a water line and then them go, well, there's room, so we're going to throw in our stormwater, and then we don't have to do an additional easement. If it's an easement to us, we control the easement.
Correct.
Okay.
And vice versa, this would also not allow additional utility expansion through the mud easements from us. All right, it protects the mud as well. Mud created in the city limits or the ETJ should not be abolished until such time as, like I said, we talked about all the bond debt is retired and there's no indebtedness. Some additional conditions for in the ETJ, we talked about this earlier. You need to demonstrate that the public improvement or a tax increment reinvestment zone are not a better alternate funding source. And then the development proposal will also limiting their eminent domain powers for the annexation of property.
How does the applicant do that? That number one, so they have to submit financials, and that's part of why they've entered a professional services agreement, because we'll have somebody review their financials on why they don't want to do a TERS?
Right, and what we're asking here is for them to demonstrate if it makes more sense to finance it through a PID instead or through a TERS. That's right.
Okay.
A MUD is a way to finance, but it may not necessarily be the best
It's
one.
a way, it doesn't have to be the way.
And sometimes it's a little harder to, I believe, to get rid of, right? And there can be additional things. Again, in the city, very similar, and the same requirement for the tax increment reinvestment zone. And again, we limit it to powers of annexation. So this is for an in-city MUD. The other one's for a ETJ MUD. They're essentially the same additional conditions. So again, the MUD creation, we're going to make sure we maintain those requirements of the petition. That's the legal description, the name of the owner, the land use plans. That's what you see in that chapter 13.05. You look at the watersheds, you look at the drainage, you look at the marketing study. Then there's a notice for petition. We're recommending that it goes to a public hearing to council and P&Z. And then that the financial limitations and performance standards are established. Utility rates in the MUD are also come back for approval. That's something you'll be reviewing, which you would have to do that anyway. And then that the MUD boards actually record their meetings, and that if they keep the minutes and the recordings, it has to be on some type of website.
Do MUD boards have to have public meetings, Mr. Borquez? Are they required to follow Texas Open Meeting Acts?
Yes, Mayor and Council. Municipal utility districts are another type of governing body and governmental entity, so the same rules regarding open meetings and open records apply.
So we ought, even though it's the rule, we ought to throw that in there, that's our expectation, that they
Correct.
follow that rule.
A lot of this is already required, but we're just having it in our policy, and they just have to prove up that they plan to do that.
Things like minutes, sorry to interrupt you, but things like minutes and recordings are not required by law to be on the internet. That's often a choice. This would make it a requirement.
Okay, thank you.
Again, so before there's an application to dissolve the mud, the debt should be paid, the developer has to be reimbursed, and that there's no delinquent payments. Again, that's just the recommendation of staff. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Yeah, I never wait till that last slide, do I, Trey?
No,
Sorry
it's
about
okay.
that.
I just wanted to, I was trying to be in a hurry. I know it's.
No, I appreciate that. Go back to the 1445 agreement, that slide, because, and I'm just testing for understanding. It is my understanding currently, we know that we have 9.5 square miles, but we have like 130-something square miles of ETJ. And we have statutory ETJ, we have what we call Contract Area A and Contract Area B. My understanding of the 1445 that we have with Bastrop County is that in Area A, they follow our subdivision rules, and in Area B, they follow the county subdivision rules. Am I anywhere close?
That is correct, unless there's a development agreement established with the city, or it is a special district with, like a MUD.
So according to the 1445, if they're in Contract Area B and they aren't coming to the city to, which they could come to us to approve the MUD, but if they chose to go to the county, then our agreement with the county is that they are not then building roads to city standards.
So yes, so unless there's a development agreement with the city,
If there's
Or-
not a development agreement
they're
with the
following
city.
county standards.
They follow county
That's correct.
standards. The county.
the county is the plat.
County reviews it and in Contract Area B. And that's the purpose and the agreement of the 1445.
Right, and there's a particular section that speaks to, unless you're a MUD or with a development agreement.
Okay. Council, any questions for Mr. Jobe? Any direction that you're uncomfortable with, things that you want to review differently? Councilmember Rogers?
Can you repeat what you just said? So if it, in the Area B, they build it to the county standards, even if they make a MUD?
It's my understanding that if we have a development agreement, they follow city standards and will review the subdivision. If there is a municipal utility district, and some I may need help on here, Alan, with this development agreement, then they also are required to be approved at our subdivision standards.
If it goes with a development agreement. But if
That's
they
my
don't-
understanding.
Okay, so can they, because I don't know anything about construction, so can they make the MUD without a development agreement with the city in that section B?
So are you
Yes.
can you help me
Yes.
with this one?
Yes. I just want to make sure, because you were bringing them together, MUD and
It's the same
development
section, but
agreement,
I understand.
if they can build it without the development agreement with the city.
They
can
still
build
come to
MUD.
us for consent, and I think that's something we can negotiate. Does that make sense?
If I can interrupt for a second and
Please.
give some background. The way the state statute works is they cannot create a MUD in a city's ETJ or city limits without first coming to the city council for consent. If we don't give consent, then they can petition for services. If we can't provide services, they have alternate ways to get their MUD approved. They can get it approved through TCEQ. They can get it approved through the legislature, through special legislation. So we're not allowed to hold them up necessarily here at City Hall. The Water Code does not provide much in the way of standards for when a city shall approve or not approve consent for the creation of the MUD. It does not, state law does not provide much in the way of a process for how do we get to that decision at City Hall. It does say that as part of our consent, we can require that before bonds are ever issued, they enter into an agreement. And the agreement will contain certain terms such as what happens with annexation? When do we annex? Who provides what services? What happens to the tax rate so that whoever lives there is not paying more than the city's highest tax rate? Oh, and by the way, you can add other things the city thinks is germane to that contract. So what you often see is consent to the creation of a MUD takes two forms: a resolution consenting to the MUD creation and a consent to the creation of MUD agreement, a contract that is negotiated with the developer, who's usually the property owner, who's the person that's championing the MUD.
So what you have in front of you is a draft of a policy that started with something my firm has used in other communities. Staff worked with me to make some tweaks to it, and we're presenting it to you for feedback because we see a lot more MUDs coming your direction, and so we'd like to have some policy guidance from the council up front in addition to what's already in our code of ordinances, such as, do you want these things to go to P&Z before they come to you? What other requirements? Trey had a slide that talked about, can you tell us why a PID is not an option? Can you tell us why a TERS is not an option? In some cases, we may prefer those, and they may not know it until they present something to us. Some requirements regarding the bonds, how much for what it's spent on, the quality standards things are constructed to, whether we're going to ever inherit it through annexation or dedication or otherwise. There's just a laundry list of things to be considered. And so that's why we're putting this forward. We have a little bit in our ordinance, but not near enough, considering we think a lot more of these things are coming your direction. And so if you have tweaks, the mayor's terminology issues regarding annexation, I think are legit. And so we can work on what that language would look like before you actually were to adopt this thing. Any other questions, comments, or concerns you have, we can put into a revised version.
Thank you for bringing up that map. Did that answer your question? And in that light green area that's contract B, even if there's a development agreement, to get back to what Mayor Pro Tem Nelson brought up, the development agreement can say, these are the conditions upon which we would annex you, but we still can't annex them until it's contiguous, correct?
Unless they're dedicating some piece of property to us that would allow us to annex off of, which is a complicated, different matter.
Which is why they need a development services agreement.
The definition of city limits is subject to interpretation. We all know what we traditionally think of.
Gotcha.
That ring within which we have our full municipal police powers. But sometimes cities own property elsewhere that's
Gotcha.
not contiguous. It's annexed into the city, even though it's not touching. And then at property owner's request, you annex off of that. It's sometimes casually referred to as island annexation. It happens periodically. It's not that common. It's not that often discussed.
Thank you. That's
So as with all the Mayor Pro Tem's questions, there's seldom an easy answer. It's complicated.
Well, here's some more. You know, my concern is in reading over the document is that we're able to exercise the appropriate care and concern and control over an area to ensure that we protect the city's investments, good name, its future, and what all. And if we're not able to exercise that care and concern over a MUD or a development and what all like that, what assurance can we provide our citizens as a city that we're protecting the good name of the city?
If I understand your question, I can say that in part because of the limitation of our powers for unilateral annexation, it's getting increasingly difficult for cities to regulate what occurs in the ETJ. This last legislative session, there were several bills filed that would each in their own way further chip away at what regulatory authorities cities have in their ETJ. And so by entering into things such as consent to the creation of MUD agreements, PIDs and PID agreements, that gives us one more avenue to, yes, ultimately help the developer get reimbursed for what they're spending on the infrastructure for their project. But in the course of doing so, we also get to impose some rules or conditions we might not otherwise unilaterally be able to do. So as long as you've got property owners who want or need something from us, and we're willing to be reasonable and sit down and work with them, we can sometimes steer a project to get an ultimate better result than we would have if we said no and they just went out and did what they wanted to in the ETJ anyway. One lawyer's opinion.
Thank you, sir.
Certainly.
All right, Mr. Job and Mr. Hoffman, did you get what you needed? So we're not voting on this. This is just a presentation. If there's no further questions for staff, I have someone signed up to speak. Steve Chamberlain, Mr. Chamberlain, if you'd state your name and address, you will have 3 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. For the record, my name is Steve Chamberlain, and if it matters, I am the Democratic County Chair.
Are you representing the Democratic Party on this
I'm
item?
representing the good people of Bastrop County.
Thank you.
First, I want to state that none of the people I'm working with are against this development. We welcome growth in Bastrop County if it's done properly. As we explained in the letter a few weeks ago to all of you, if you use your powers of the city has adopted the B3 code, and under the MUD, you can work with and get agreements for not zoning B3, but get things in the B3 that protect the city and the community. The code can ensure, or using this type code can ensure that the infrastructure lasts and we do not take over deteriorating infrastructure. As we stated in the second letter to the city manager yesterday, we are very encouraged that the city is looking at this, and because you can get under the consent for the MUD, you can get these things put in there. Basically, I'm kind of lost at what was being said here, but I do know that we want to limit what happens so that it lasts for a long time. I'm not going to be around by the time the thing is completely done. But for our children and our grandchildren, we want the infrastructure and the tax system to be where it is sustainable. We want it done right. The B3 code that you have, if you use that, not saying enforce the B3 code there because you can't in the MUD, but use those to get consents from the builders that all that is followed. I look forward, and I do want to say I appreciate your working with the county on this. I know y'all have met and done a lot of things, had a lot of discussions on getting it done right. I just want to further talk with Mr. Job and understand what's going on, work with the city, and the city work with the county to make sure it's done properly. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chamberlain. All right, council. Let's go to 12F on page 4. Consider action to approve the first reading of ordinance number 2021-16 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, amending the budget for fiscal year 2021 in accordance with the existing statutory requirements, appropriating the various amounts herein as attached in Exhibit A, repealing all prior ordinances and actions in conflict herewith, establishing an effective date, and move to include on the November 9th City Council agenda for a second reading. Ms. Waldron.
Good evening again, Mayor and Council. So just to clarify, this is a budget amendment for fiscal 2021. So I realize we're going backwards a little bit, but sometimes there are amendments that are required even after the fiscal year has ended. And so this is really what it is. So I'll go through this fairly quickly. If you have questions, just stop me. But we're amending the revenue in the budget amendment number 1, increasing sales tax, increasing inspection fees, and increasing recreation fees. You'll see these circle back around later in different amendments. Amendment number 2, organizational. We did have an increase in our property and liability insurance that I had to account for, and also because sales tax has been higher, I still hadn't appropriated enough for the 380 reimbursement agreement with Burleson Crossing, so I had to bump that up a little bit. So those two are covered by budget amendment number 1. Budget amendment number 3 in the city secretaries, it's just a little bit of cleanup. I was short on the group insurance when we did the reorganization back in January. Also, the election services contract was a little more than we had appropriated originally. Budget amendment number 4, this is the special event and reservation, but it also is where recreation landed when we took it over unexpectedly back in, that was also in January, February, March. So we had to make an adjustment on the contracted services and bring that up. That's offset with the revenue increase from budget amendment number 1. Budget amendment number 5 is just taking some of those police patrol savings from salaries that is offsetting the increase in the city secretary department. Budget amendment number 6, development services. We still, at the end of the year, were really going crazy with building permits and building inspections, and so this is also offset by the revenue increase. Budget amendment number 7 really is just an accounting cleanup. I wanted to put an entire vehicle in the VERF fund, so I needed to reappropriate the $12,500. This is to clean up what I've discussed the last several months. We did a refunding, and so the general debt service fund needed to appropriate the money coming in and the money going out. And in the Fairview Cemetery, I had talked about the fact that we had purchased back quite a few plots this year. We did not appropriate for those. And also, our employee out of the cemetery did get some increases during the restructuring, and so that corrected the shortage in his salaries. And I do believe that was the last amendment. If you have any questions
Will that
for
be the
me.
last amendment for fiscal year 21?
Yeah, I can't fit any more in, so yeah, we're going to be done.
Councilmember Rogers?
Well, first, thank you, Tracy, for understanding. I was
You're
not
welcome.
know what year you're in at the time. So I move to approve.
I have a motion to approve from Councilmember Rogers. I have a second from Councilmember Jackson. Is there any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Rogers?
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson?
Yes.
Councilmember Crouch?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson?
Yes.
Thank you, Council. The motion passes unanimously. Okay, we finished page 4. We're going to go back to page 2. Calling on the mayor's report. I want to, anybody who's still watching from home, make sure that you vote. Early voting is going on this week, and it is 8 to 5 tomorrow and 7 to 7 on Thursday and Friday. So just want to remind everybody of that. Colin, you can go to the next page. This is a big deal, and that is that the e-cabs are now running from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and from 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. Friday through Sunday. And the carts that you can also do, the carts now, is continuing to do 7 to 7 Monday through Friday. So some people know that the cabs are now going at night, but not everybody knew that, so I included the flyer, and I just wanted to get that out there. I had some folks that indicated that they might like to ride the cab down and indulge in adult beverage and not be driving, and I know that makes Chief Nagy quite happy when they are not driving. So wanted to make sure everybody knew about that change. If you go to the next slide, we had our 5th annual board and commission banquet, which was awesome. There's our Scenic City Award, which was the only picture we got of all of us together. Wasn't it nice that we were all in our city shirts? That was a very cool thing. If you go just below that, I was at the Big Pink Bus, and you see me there with Mayor Joanne Morgan from Smithville and Mayor Ramirez from Elgin, and Commissioner Beckett was representing the judge. And October, make sure everybody gets their mammograms. If you go to the left, I went to the Murder Me Always, which was the last show that was at the Bastrop Opera House, which was wonderful. And I'm interested in if anybody else figured out who the murder person was. It was one of those, it was a dinner theater. Somebody gets killed during the play, and you have to do the clues and figure out who you think it is. So that was really a good way to spend the evening. And the South Southeast Regional BPCR, which stands for Black Powder Cartridge Rifle Tournament, is where I have been for the last 7 days. And I wanted to give a shout out to my husband. There were participants from 13 states. There were 3 different competitions, one with a .22 and 2 with a .45-70, and my husband placed second in all 3 competitions out of people in 13 states. So if not only did we drive 985 miles yesterday to get me back in time for city council, but that is him with his .45-70 on the sticks because they're awfully heavy, and underneath where the BPCR tournament, that's the targets he's shooting at with open iron sights. So,
Madam Mayor, I understand that although he shot open iron, there were, the people placed above him used scopes?
On 2 of the competitions, scope and open iron sights were together. So he was competing against folks that were using scopes.
That needed to be said.
Yes, thank you. He will appreciate that. So he's going to be really mad that I'm talking about it at all, but I wanted everybody to know where I was for the last week. We were in Georgia, and bless his heart for all he does to allow me to serve as mayor, and I'm just really proud of his ability to compete. So that was kind of a cool thing. We were in the middle of nowhere, which you can go to the next slide, Colin, is also known as Dawsonville, Georgia. And that happens to be the home of Bill Elliott and Chase Elliott. And if you're involved in NASCAR, that means something to you. If you're not, it means absolutely nothing to you. But I wanted you to see the Dawsonville City Hall, because once you're a mayor, you are never not the mayor. And their City Hall is attached to the Georgia Driving Hall of Fame. And I believe that's because there was a little funding assistance from the Hall of Fame to build the hall. It's a very, very cool city hall. And Colin, if you go to the picture next to it, underneath that awning, Dawsonville has a lending library and a food bank. And I thought that was interesting that those were just outside of their city hall. And I will have to tell you that it made me really proud that we have a huge public library that serves our citizens. And I think that the amount of food in the food pantry barrel, which was really sweet, and it's a very small town, but I think Tricia Silva passes that amount of food out in about the first 5 minutes in one day. So I'm proud of the fact that we have a good food pantry. But thought it was really, I just always enjoy seeing what other cities do. The next slide shows the things that I'm doing coming up, and the only thing that I want to point out is the Bird City Coalition meeting is coming up, and Ms. Fossler, I'm going to try to come, but I think I'm double booked, so I'm apologizing in advance. And on October 30th, the city is doing their Boo Bash, and I failed to put that on my council report. So that's my mayor's report. For council member reports, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson, do you have anything for us tonight?
Well, nothing to report as exciting as what you've been doing over the past few weeks. I'm receiving a lot of phone calls relative to a display of it's been called a dummy, an effigy, a scarecrow hanging from a piece of equipment that's outside of the city limits. And while I find it personally offensive and inflammatory to a certain extent, being a staunch defender and proponent of property rights as well as the First Amendment, what person chooses to do on their private property, while it may be offensive, is something that they can do, but there's not a thing that I can do in my position as a city council member. But I do want to go on record that I find it personally offensive, and if somebody wants to say, well, the mayor pro tem is not doing anything about the problem. If I could, I would, but I can't, so I won't.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Nelson. I appreciate you addressing that and find it extremely offensive myself. And much as we just saw an hour of neighbors that don't always agree with what's going on, and they were respectful. And kindness goes a really long way, and it's disappointing. Councilmember Rogers.
Yes, Mayor, I went to my first historic landmark commission.
Yay!
And that was extremely informative. I was like, wow, they really know their stuff. I was totally impressed. I was totally lost for a little while, but I asked some questions, and they didn't have any problem explaining it to me. So I appreciate you putting me on there and look forward to learning more.
Excellent. Thank you, Councilmember Rogers. Councilmember Peterson.
Yes, thanks, Mayor. Real quickly, I attended the tour of Fairview Cemetery on Saturday and had a great time, and it was a great turnout over there. So had a good time just going over and visiting. And my hat's off to the cemetery board because those guys, they really did an excellent job over there. They really did. And with that, I'm glad you brought up the ECAB because I was speaking with a lady while I was at the cemetery, and she was wondering about parking downtown because she can't get to the bookstore. And she asked me, could we expand parking down there? And I said, well, I don't think so. But thanks for bringing up the ECAB. I can suggest that to her, to use the ECAB to go down to the bookstore.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much. Councilmember Jackson.
Well, ditto on the statue, the dummy or whatever, the effigy. I find it appalling also, but as a council member, there's nothing I can do about that either. But I do sympathize with the people in the community that find it offensive and are looking for other means to talk about it, but it is private property and outside the city limits. I also went on the cemetery tour and found it very informative. In fact, I learned some things, and as a fifth-generation Bastropian, there were some things that I learned that just amazed me, and I was just really glad that they did that. And I talked to them afterwards, and they're going to expand that next year, and I think it'll be really even better. And I got a chance to ride with Councilmember Crouch. He was our driver because I didn't want to walk through the cemetery, and that was very good also. So good tour, and I was very happy to do that.
Thank you, Councilmember Jackson. Councilmember Crouch, thank you for your driving skills and keeping Councilmember Jackson safe. What do you have for us this evening?
We didn't have any accidents or anything. It was kind of neat. I got to attend the first Main Street board meeting, which was kind of neat. And they're doing a lot of awesome stuff. So it was my first time to sit in on that meeting, and I'm really glad to be there. I'm outnumbered because it's 100% women except for me. So that was interesting. And then I went to the building Bastrop for electrical. And thank you to Mr. Hoffman and Trey and the staff for putting those together each month. I think it's really helpful. I wish that they were more attended or better attended, but I think it just depends on which group you're addressing. But it's definitely helpful and gets questions out there, and I know we're recording them, and I've had a lot of people tell me that they're watching them on YouTube. So thank you guys for doing that. And then y'all have heard me talk about this Sister City program, and I've been doing a lot of research on it, and I don't feel like I'm wasting my time on it, but next door to where I live, the people put their house on for bed and breakfast or the B&B, and then this weekend they had people from Washington, D.C. in it, and I went for a bike ride with them and gave them a tour of Bastrop, and during that time they told me that they knew the person in Washington, D.C. that's the head of the Sister City program, and gave me their contact information and some very helpful information to kind of finalize that. So I want to present that to everybody in the next week or so, just to see if we're interested in doing something like that. But it was just kind of real coincidental that the national person that is running that right now was next door to my house. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And that's it.
All right, thank you, Councilmember Crouch. We're on to item 7C, City Manager's Report. Mr. Hoffman.
Thank you, Mayor. There's a couple of things I wanted to mention real quickly that I don't think I have on slides. The council know I'll be spending a part of the day tomorrow at McKinney Ruffs for a strategic planning session that the Visit Bastrop Board is holding. I've been invited to attend a portion of their meeting and give them a little bit of an update from the city's perspective on how the partnership between the city and Visit Bastrop is going. I think the partnership is going really well. Was impressed with the presentation we all heard several weeks ago at the joint meeting. Impressed with the work that's happening with the promotion of the convention center. We're actually already seeing benefit from that, so I look forward to spending a little bit of time with them tomorrow and appreciate the invitation. Council, you know from previous correspondence that we submitted a grant application to the St. David's Foundation that's intended to fund the Parks and Recreation Master Plan update that we have scheduled for this current fiscal year. We continue to work with the St. David's Foundation on that grant application. They have asked now several fairly detailed follow-up questions. I take that as a good sign that they're interested and engaged. A lot of thanks to Rebecca Gleason and Terry Moore for keeping those responses going in a timely manner. On Thursday of this week, there's a planning meeting happening at the Hyatt Lost Pines of the Texas City Management Association. I think I've mentioned to council before that next year's annual TCMA conference is held here in Bastrop or at Hyatt Lost Pines, which is really super cool. And Rebecca and others will be meeting with that committee to help them understand all the stuff that can be done in Bastrop. They don't need to turn right and head to Austin for their leisure time. They can turn left. In fact, Trey has suggested that that's a new phrase we can use for folks who are at Lost Pines. You can turn left, come to Bastrop, and have a good time. Colin, could you go to the next slide? So, Council, you heard from Curtis Hancock a few weeks ago about accepting a donation for the construction of a disc golf course at Bob Bryant Park. And here are just a quick few photographs of work being done to start clearing the area for that, in case you were wondering what that work is all about. Colin, go ahead. And I know folks who live in Hunter's Crossing have been anxiously awaiting the striping of the newly paved streets there. We've received some inquiry about that, and so that work is ongoing as well and is looking good. And your next meeting is November 9th, and just as a reminder, one of the things scheduled for November 9th is the workshop that Mr. Esch, when he was here a few weeks ago, described to City Council. And by the way, Council, thank you for scheduling your interview times with Mr. Esch over the next few days. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday are full of interviews of council members, EDC board members, and some city staff and EDC staff, and that will culminate in a workshop discussion about that ultimate policy directive. And if we stay on schedule, that ultimate policy directive will be voted on by City Council on December 14th. We will need to work on a schedule, Council, that works for maintaining a good order of things on November the 9th. November 9th will also be when you receive our next quarterly report. The updated and renewed agreement with Visit Bastrop is on schedule for being on that agenda. We needed to wait for the Visit Bastrop board to approve that agreement. I understand they plan to do that tomorrow. As described by the city attorney earlier today, the schedule calls for second reading of the zoning concept scheme for Farm Street Village. We are not amending fiscal 21 budget on November 9th, except on second reading. I guess that's probably what that means. We're working on several professional service agreements for construction management and inspection-related services. Fabiola is working on those, and we plan to bring those to you for your consideration in 2 weeks. And I think there's another slide of November 9th agenda items. No, is that it? Okay. Thanks, Colin. Council, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Council, any questions for Mr. Hoffman? Councilmember Jackson?
Oh, I was just wondering, I know that, that the city manager, at the request of some citizens, developed a diversity task force, and I was thinking that we were going to get an update on what's, I mean, I don't know what's really happening with that, and I was wondering if maybe by the next meeting or so, we can get an update or update the council on.
I have provided updates in prior weekly memos, and I'm happy to continue to do that. The next meeting of the task force is scheduled for Monday, November the 8th. And the plan we've laid out with the task force calls for that day's discussion to be centered around our community engagement activities. And so what we plan to do is present to the task force all of the means and methods and tools that we use to promote community engagement, and let the task force absorb that and make some suggestions back to us with regard to how that could be improved from a diversity and inclusion standpoint. Very similarly, and I did report on this to council in a weekly memo, at the prior meeting, we presented quite a bit of detail on our hiring and recruitment efforts and got some great feedback from the task force about how those procedures can be improved upon, and that was the point of the update I provided in the weekly memo. We're implementing those procedures, so we're working hard to present good information and listen well to the feedback from the task force, and we'll continue to do that.
Okay, I guess I saw some of those. I just thought there would be more detailed information than that, but that's fine if that's what the extent of the information is going to be for us. Okay.
Councilmember Crouch, did you have a question or comment?
I did. I just wanted to see the consultant that's going to interview council and BEDC. Is it the BEDC board or BEDC
board
and staff, or
and this was presented in some amount of detail as well. He'll be meeting with each member of the board and the interim director as well.
Okay, but not the rest of the staff? The other two people?
No, just the interim director.
Okay. I guess my concern was Janora has just been there temporary for not that long, and then the other staff have been there for quite a while, and it might not be a bad idea to get their input as well as the board members that's been there for a while, and then Janora too.
Okay, duly noted. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sounds good.
All right, Councilmember Crouch, was that all?
Yes.
All right, we are moving on to item 7D, a proclamation of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, and Bastrop County Commissioners Court recognizing November 11th as Veterans Day. I have a copy of the proclamation. Council, I would encourage you guys to attend. We know it is a fun car show weekend. This year, it's the proclamations will be read at the county courthouse. So that's a different location. So I would encourage you to look at the Facebook postings that both the county and the city will be putting out and the car show will be putting out to make sure you know the times and when things are going on. I would like to personally thank Councilmember Peterson and Mayor Pro Tem Nelson for your service to our country. It is an honor to serve with veterans. I know Assistant City Manager Job, and are there any other veterans that are in the room tonight? I think that's it. Let's give them a round of applause. I'm a mother of a veteran, and I will tell you that although I have always had respect for veterans, there's nothing like having it personally in your family. So I am extremely honored and thrilled that the City of Bastrop gives the recognition, just a small portion of recognition that the veterans so very richly deserve. Encourage folks to attend the Red, White, and Blue dinner and enjoy the entire weekend. We already read the proclamation. Item 9B was pulled, so city manager, that will be on the agenda for the next meeting. Council, I'm over on page 3, approval of meeting minutes. Consider action to approve city council minutes from October 12th, 2021, regular meeting.
Move to approve.
I have a motion to approve from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson and a second from Councilmember Jackson. Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson,
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson,
Yes.
Councilmember Crouch,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. The city minutes are approved. I'm doing this because I was asked to. We're going to go to item 12C, consider action to approve resolution number R 2021-102 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, to ratify the award of FM 20 16-inch water main project to M&C Fonseca Construction Company, Inc. in the amount of $165,812 as attached as Exhibit A, authorizing the city manager to execute all necessary amendments, providing for a repealing clause and establishing an effective date. Mr. Hancock, thank you for
Mayor,
hanging with us
Council,
tonight.
City Manager, I'm here tonight to ask y'all to ratify the contract with MC Fonseca for an amount of $165,812 for the installation of the 16-inch water line down Highway 20.
There was an excellent staff report in the packet, and I appreciate the fact that it's more important to get it done.
Yes, ma'am.
I move to approve.
I have a motion to approve from Councilmember Rogers,
Second.
a second from Councilmember Crouch. Is there any further discussion or deliberation?
I have a comment, Madam Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson?
Mr. Hancock, I really appreciate your staff and the work, the workmanship that they're doing on the striping in Hunter's Crossing. Every time I've seen them, they've been at it, and that's good training and good supervision. So I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I will share that with them. Thank you.
All right, Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Councilmember Rogers,
Yes.
Councilmember Crouch,
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Thank you, Council. The vote is unanimous, and Resolution 2021-102 is approved. Councilmember Crouch, did you have a comment you wanted to make? Okay, I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to overspeak to me. All right, item 12B, consider action to approve resolution number R 2021-98 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, confirming appointment by the mayor of David Lowen to alternate one of the Zoning Board of Adjustment as required in Section 3.08 of the city's charter and establishing an effective date. Mr. Lowen has excellent credentials. I believe you all have access to a copy of his application. We're trying to keep the alternate positions filled. The Zoning Board of Adjustment, when it meets, it's very important that they're able to make a quorum.
Madam Mayor, move to approve this confirmation.
Second.
I have a motion from Mayor Pro Tem Nelson and a second from Councilmember Rogers. Is there any further discussion? Madam Secretary, if you'll call the roll.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson,
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson,
Yes.
Councilmember Crouch,
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much for your confirmation of my appointment. That I believe, unless somebody sees something that I've missed, that the last item we have on the agenda is item 12A. Consider action to approve resolution number R 2021-99 of the City Council of the City of Bastrop, Texas, adopting the early voting system 6110 voting system, providing for a repealing clause and establishing an effective date. Ms. Franklin.
Mayor and council, I know that our election is not coming in November. Our election is in May. However, we have already started work towards that. We start months out in advance. And having said that, we contract with the county, and the county has purchased new voting equipment. And by law, state law, the county is required to get approval from the Secretary of State's office before they are allowed to purchase and use the voting machines. So in doing that, because we contract with them, our governing body must approve the use of the voting machines as well, because we contract with the county. So the county had 70 voting systems, and they purchased an additional 80, which brought it to a count of 150 voting machines. They also purchased 30 precinct scanners, which they didn't have before. The precinct scanners will allow them to count the votes at each polling location and store that information on a hard drive. It won't be available to anyone. It will still not be counted until the end of the night, but it can speed up the count because they have it on the hard drive. The scanners will also allow, and the goal is for the county to be able to have voting centers, which will be great because the citizens can go to any location and vote. You don't have to go to your precinct on voting day, so that'll be great. And so having these machines, this will determine the county going totally electronic, no paper ballots after that. So I'm here before you to ask for your approval on the city using the new voting systems that the county is purchasing.
I'm so happy
Mayor
the
Pro Tem
county's
Nelson.
moving to more ADA accessible equipment. I'm happy with that. With that, I move to approve.
I have a motion to approve from
Second.
Mayor Pro Tem Nelson and a second from Councilmember Peterson. Ms. Franklin, thank you so much for everything you do to make sure that our elections run smoothly and follow the laws, and those laws are changing a lot. And I really appreciate the partnership that you have with Kristen and the folks at Bastrop County.
Yes, ma'am.
Would you like to call the roll?
Yes, ma'am. Mayor Pro Tem Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Peterson.
Yes.
Councilmember Jackson.
Yes.
Councilmember Crouch.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes. Thank you, Council. The
you.
motion passes unanimously. Our 2021-99 is approved. That brings us to the bottom of page 4. It is 9:48. Councilmember Peterson?
Thank you, Mayor. Motion to adjourn.
I have a motion to adjourn from Councilmember Peterson and a second from Councilmember Rogers. It is 9:48 p.m. We are adjourned. Thank you for hanging with us tonight, Council. Be safe and go Astros.